Peter stood in my office, desperate and disheveled. "You're turning her against me," he spat, as if I needed to. His guilt was his undoing, and I didn't hold back. "She chose you once, and look where that led." My words landed like blows, but his plea, "I just want her back," lingered in the air. For the first time, I saw him not as a rival, but as a man who'd lost everything. Still, I couldn't forgive. The damage was done. I arrived at my office feeling cheerful on Monday morning, but there, waiting for me, was Peter Davies. My heart sank. I didn't want to start my week with a difficult argument. He stood as I walked in, and I noticed Carol hadn't arrived yet. "Peter Davies, I see you're waiting for me," I said, continuing toward my office. He followed. When I turned to look at him, I had to admit he was quite handsome. He also looked healthy and rested, which was not what I expected to see. He smiled and said, "I came here first before I go to the Abbey to see Piers and let him know I'm back at work with a fresh outlook. I wanted you to be the first to know." I replied, "That's great to hear. I did a lot of thinking over the weekend. I realized I can't keep living in the past. I have to embrace the future." That sounded good to me. "Well, I know you're good at your job, so you have a bright career ahead." He smiled again. "I know that. I need to catch up with Piers since I slipped up a bit recently. Part of the reason I came to see you is to apologize and promise I'm back at work, dedicated and ready. I assume you've spoken with Molly?" I paused inside. "Yes, I have." His eyes were searching. "And nothing's changed?" "No, she was very upset. She's been through a lot." He smiled again. "Well, it's time for forgiveness and for everyone to move on. We can't keep looking back at the past and the things we regret." I started to believe he had accepted the situation, which was a relief. He reached out his hand, and I surprised myself by shaking it. "Best of luck," I wished him. I watched him leave. Life is full of surprises. I returned to my work, and 10 minutes later, Carol came by with a cup of coffee. "I saw Peter Davies on my way in. Did he stop by to see you?" she asked, trying to sound casual but clearly interested. I leaned back and smiled. "Another twist in your soap opera. He came to say he wants to forgive everyone and move on, though I'm not quite sure what he's forgiven them for." Well, I noticed he seemed in a good mood. "He said it was due to the fresh air over the weekend. I suppose that's a good thing," she replied. "Yes, it is," I agreed. "Anyway, how was your weekend?" "Quiet, but nice. How about yours?" I smiled. "It started off poorly and then it got worse. But then things started to improve, and yesterday was really good." "Any other updates?" "If you're asking if I've made a decision, the answer is no. But I have decided to take my time with it." She took a seat and looked at me. "Can I say something?" I shrugged and smiled. "Go ahead. Everyone else has. I thought a lot over the weekend about what your mother and stepfather said. I believe they were mistaken. You don't have to fix things with Molly no matter how you feel." I smiled, but she went on. "However, it is important to at least try." Suddenly, I wasn't smiling anymore. "I was wrong. No, you can't speak." She smiled. "Could you look your sons in the eyes and say, 'When I had the chance to bring our family together, to give you a loving home, I just walked away'? Isn't it better to walk away than to give them false hope? Do you respect people who turn away from opportunities without trying?" I sighed. "Okay, I see your point." I half smiled. "Grab the diary and let's discuss the week." My morning went well. I was busy, which I preferred. I had lunch in the dining room with Stephen Hobbs, who was visiting from Exeter, and Annette Morgan. I wanted to observe how they interacted. After lunch, I walked upstairs to my office with Stephen, since we were both heading to my first meeting with the heads of departments. I hoped this meeting would take charge of things beyond just legal needs. I was standing in my office with Stephen, chatting about ordinary things while waiting for everyone else to arrive when Piers McBain walked in. He looked concerned. "Ah, Chris, I was hoping to speak with you." I glanced at Stephen. "Can you give me a moment, please?" Both Piers and I watched him leave and close the door. Once alone, I turned to Piers and smiled. "Peter Davies came to see me this morning, and it was a bit worrying. But he plans to move on with his career and let the past go, which is a relief. Piers still looked uneasy. He mentioned he had spoken with you. He came to see me first thing today and said he was focused on his work now and ready to let go of the past. He even talked about acceptance and forgiveness, which I thought was aimed at me regarding some things I said. How do you feel about that? I think we misunderstood him. Like you, I was happy he was looking to change. But just before coming here, I thought I'd check in on him. I wanted to let him know I'd see him after this meeting. I have a lot of things to share with him that I've kept from him for the past few weeks, but if he's back and ready to go, he can deal with it all. Okay, why does this matter to me? He asked. Because he said he would leave right on time this afternoon, maybe even a bit early. He needs to go to the florist to pick up a special bouquet of sweet peas he ordered. Then he needs to get home and change. He's arranged for a babysitter, made a reservation at their favorite restaurant on King Street, and he plans to talk to Molly to make things right and fix their marriage. I responded with just one word. Wow. Piers smiled, glad he shared this with me. I think we both misunderstood him. I nodded as I thought deeply. Piers stood and watched me for a moment before asking, "Are you going to call Molly and give her a heads up?" I turned to him. That's exactly what I'm thinking. But no, I won't. He's her husband. It's up to her to tell him if things are over. If she chooses to go out with him, well, then I'll know where I stand. Are you sure? Piers said, looking uncertain. Yes. One thing I don't get is the relationship between Molly and Peter. They had a moment together which isn't right, and I don't know if I can forgive her for that. But if she never loved him, why did she marry him? And if she can't end things now, I just don't understand. Just then, Carol walked in. They're all waiting for you in the boardroom. Do you want them in here instead? No, there aren't enough seats. Plus, I need you there to take notes. I looked at Piers. Come on, I'm counting on you to keep this meeting focused. We're here to make decisions. I had a productive afternoon, but by the end of it, I sat at my desk wondering if I should have warned Molly. I was lost in thought when I realized someone was in the room. Turning around, I saw it was Myra. I smiled. Hey, stranger, I haven't seen you in days. She came over and sat by my desk. I was in London for a couple of days last week and one day in Exeter. I tried to reach you on Friday evening, but you were already gone. Sorry, I had to go to a small party for Jamie's birthday. Well, what's the news? I remembered the last time I saw Myra, I had told her that Molly cared for me, but I hadn't updated her on anything since. Then I thought of something. What are you doing tonight? She looked unsure. Nothing. Should I be busy with something else? I have a boyfriend, you know. It's just as friends, I promise. I could use some company for dinner this evening. How about I combine everything and treat you to dinner? She smiled. Sure. Let's take 2 cars to King Street. We can go to that place we visited before. You can't miss it. It's bright green. I thought if Molly accepts Peter's offer, it will be a nice surprise for them to see me and Myra enjoying dinner at their favorite restaurant. We had a relaxing meal. Although we agreed to stick with 1 bottle of wine, we still had a glass before ordering food. I held off on sharing the story about Molly until I asked about how Myra was doing with Dr. Will. From the way she spoke, things seemed to be going really well, maybe even better than that, based on the smile in her eyes. I figured she would share more with me in her own time. Then, as she encouraged me, I told her Molly's story, just like I had told Carol and Piers McBain last week at the pub. I wrapped up by mentioning Carol's belief that I should try to build something with Molly. I chose not to mention Peter's little act from earlier, mainly because I thought it would be better if any special diners showed up by chance, and also because I wasn't sure what to make of it myself. I started to wonder if Peter had planned his words carefully to confuse me. She looked at me from across the table. So what's stopping you from trying? It's simple. It doesn't seem worth it. Even if I could forgive her for what happened, and even if I could see why she married him, we've both changed. You can't just put everything back the way it was. She's been with another man for 4 years, and I've traveled and experienced so much too much, really. We've both moved on. Myra took a sip of wine. Okay. She paused, then smiled. Change of topic. I don't think I've ever told you about my background. We've talked about Jonathan, but not about me before that. You're right. What secrets have you kept? None, actually. I grew up with my parents, a sister, and a brother in Bexley Heath, a typical middle-class neighborhood in South London. I'm not familiar with it. Well, trust me, it's fine average and the people are nice enough. Anyway, I had a very special childhood friend named Tilly. Matilda to be official, but she always went by Tilly. She was 1 week older than me, 6 days to be exact, and she lived a few doors down. I think our moms met in antenatal classes. Tilly and I grew up like sisters. We went to the same nursery, then local schools, and even the same university. She studied modern languages while I focused on business administration. In our second and third years, we shared an apartment. We were really close. Should I be surprised? Or are you going to admit that you might be into girls and that Dr. Will is just pretending? Not at all. Then she smiled playfully. Except we did practice kissing one afternoon when we were about 14, just so we wouldn't mess up when we got to boys. I smiled back, and she went on. Well, in our third year of college, Tilly met a Spanish guy. He was quite good-looking, but I quickly figured out that he had a reputation for being charming but not staying around. I tried to warn her, but she always said I was just jealous. This caused a lot of tension between us, and I learned to keep quiet. I just hoped they would break up before she got hurt. So you learned to be diplomatic. Too bad you don't use that skill now, I said, smiling. She stuck her tongue out at me and continued. Then, during the summer term, Tilly told me they planned to get engaged after graduation and marry soon after. I felt really unsure. I decided there was little I could do, hoping he would be different. One weekend, Tilly went home for a family event, and I was heading to a party at school. Guess what? Her fiancé spent all evening trying to flirt with me. And did you tell her? No, I convinced myself he was just drunk and ignored it. But a couple of weeks later, at another party, he suggested that Tilly agreed to something that didn't seem right. So I told Tilly. I thought it was important for her to know what kind of man she was marrying. I took a sip of water and asked, "And what happened?" We had the only major argument I've ever had right in front of everyone at the party. He denied everything, and afterwards she didn't speak to me again. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be. It happened. As Carol says, stuff happens. You can't always avoid it. Anyway, she married him without inviting me to the wedding. My parents were invited, but not me. Then she moved to Spain with her new husband. And the lesson from this story is, we're not there yet. Last Christmas, 7 years later, my mom called to say Tilly wanted to reach out, and she gave her my address. Sure enough, Tilly showed up at my door a few days later. Was it a happy reunion? Yes, it was. It turns out I had been right all along. She admitted it. He treated her poorly, and they divorced within 3 years. But she stayed in Spain and started a business helping expatriates with language, culture, and some laws. She hired German and Swedish speakers and built a good business. She was successful. Good for her. So a bad partner doesn't stop you from being a good business person. She overlooked my comment. After a couple of years, she met another man. A British man lived in Spain, and he and a woman fell in love. He turned out to be a great guy. When she found out she was going to have a baby, they were excited because they planned to get married. But then something terrible happened. He lost his life in a terrorist attack. She was heartbroken and felt so sad that she lost the baby too. I'm sorry to hear that. In just 7 years, she had a falling out with her best friend. Married someone who wasn't right for her, got divorced, started a business, fell in love again, became a widow, and suffered a loss. That's a lot to go through in 7 years. Yes, that is a lot. How did she handle it all? And this is the important part. She was still the same person I grew up with. She had the same sense of humor and values. She still gave me that playful look when she teased me. Even the way she smoothed her dress when she sat was the same. She was still Tilly, just as I remembered her. She paused and looked at me, saying, "Chris, I know there are many reasons why you and Molly can't get back together, but being different people isn't one of them." I was surprised by her words. I paused, trying to think of a reply. I looked up and said, "Could you remind me of some of the other reasons? I might need them." She didn't seem amused by my comment. "And that's your answer, is it?" I replied, "No, I honestly don't know what my answer is yet, but I believe I will figure it out soon." I glanced at my watch. It was almost 9:30, and we had already run out of wine. Looking around, I noticed that Peter and Molly hadn't arrived, and I doubted they would show up now. So, I offered to pay the bill and suggested we head home. While driving, I thought about wanting just one person to support me. Someone who would say, "Reconciliation? Forget about it. Focus on building a good relationship with your sons and just move forward." Just one person like that would be comforting. Soon after I got home, Ralph called me. "Hey, Ralph? Sorry to bother you so late. I tried to call earlier, but your phone was off." "I was out for dinner. I usually turn my phone off when I'm in a restaurant. What's up?" "I met with Molly this afternoon. What happened on Saturday night? She's convinced something did happen, and she's still worrying about stepping into your affairs." "She's a bit late to worry about that, but honestly, Ralph, I'm going to say, please mind your own business." "Was it related to a woman? Was it that Myra?" "It's really not your concern. To the best of my understanding, I am a single man with no ties to anyone, including your daughter. I'm sorry, but when my daughter is upset because the man she cares about is seeing other people, that becomes my concern." I took a moment to choose my words carefully. "What happened on Saturday night has nothing to do with you or your daughter. I suggest you hang up before one of us says something we might regret. Tomorrow is Jamie's birthday, and I plan to take Molly and the boys out for dinner. If Molly has an issue with how I spend my Saturday nights, she can talk to me about it tomorrow. Good night, Ralph." Then I ended the call, poured myself a drink, and tried to relax. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I didn't focus on Ralph's outburst. Instead, I found myself thinking about what was happening between Molly and Peter. I hoped Molly would avoid making a scene, but deep down I wanted to believe that she was clear with him that their relationship was over and that she would pursue a divorce. The next morning, Carol brought me my first cup of coffee and watched me carefully, her eyes asking questions. "There's no need for that look. I don't know what happened. I haven't heard from her, and I'm not going to chase after her." "Oh," was all she said in response. "But if she calls or if I hear anything from the Abbey, please tell me. I can't think of anything else right now." She smiled and said, "Things happen." As she turned to leave, I called her back. "One more thing. I'm supposed to take Molly and the two boys out for dinner tonight for Jamie's birthday. Do you have any suggestions for a place? Molly is a bit worried that I've been feeding them too many burgers and pizzas. Is there a restaurant that serves healthier food but also appeals to a 9-year-old? She paused to think. Just one comes to mind. I can try to get the details, but one of the twins mentioned a place that serves various unusual meats like ostrich steaks and crocodile burgers. They might find that interesting." I smiled. "That could be fun, though it might not sit well with them. But at least it's different. Please see if you can get more information." As she was about to leave, I called her back. "Also, can you find out what's happening with the football this Saturday? I'd like to take the boys if I can. And while we're on the topic of Saturday, I'll be moving to my new flat in the morning. Could you please check that everyone knows about it and that it's all set?" She smiled. "Can I go now?" I smiled back. "You better do that before I think of more tasks for you. That might get in the way of you helping with my personal life." Half an hour later, she returned with my second cup of coffee. "You're all set to take your sons to football on Saturday, but there are some concerns from the sales team. There's plenty of space, but John Wheeler and Peter Barnes are using it to host Sir George Havers and a few of his colleagues from Oxfordshire Health. They worry it might not look good with young boys running around." I looked at her, thinking hard. "I've met George Havers. Yes, I remember the day Helene came. I had lunch with him, but I was distracted. I do recall him talking a lot about his grandchildren. Can you get him on the phone for me?" 2 minutes later, I was on the line with Sir George. "George Havers here. George, it's Chris Bennett from ITI Franks. I understand we're hosting you at the football on Saturday." "Yes? Will you be there?" "I hope so. But I need a favor from you." "What kind of favor?" he asked, sounding cautious. "Well, I promised my two boys I would take them to the game, but my sales team is a bit anxious about having a 7- and 9-year-old running around. I wondered if you could bring your grandchildren." There was a brief silence before I heard a deep chuckle. "I don't know, Mr. Bennett. You want me to be the best grandfather just because it works for you and we don't even do business together. Plus, I doubt my son and his wife would want a weekend without their 3 boys. And we know how much parents like their time to unwind. I guess if I must, I must." I laughed. "Thank you so much. You're helping me dodge a tricky situation. If your team wants to bring their kids too, they can just reach out to John Wheeler to make sure we have space and food for everyone. After hanging up, I called Carol back. No problem. George Havers is bringing his 3 grandsons. There might be a couple of other requests for kids. Can you let John know? Tell him and Peter they're welcome to bring young guests. It will strengthen our relationship with Oxfordshire Health more than any sales pitch ever could. The morning went on, and I still hadn't heard anything about what had happened between Molly and Peter the night before. Just before lunch, I was in my bathroom washing my hands and looking in the mirror, realizing I would need to call her for some reason. When I stepped out, I found Piers McBain and Neil Davidson waiting in my office. I looked at them and said, "It's like déjà vu. Have a seat, gentlemen, and tell me what this is about." We sat down by the coffee table. Piers spoke first. "You're right. It's the same old issue. Peter didn't come to work this morning, and we haven't heard from him at all. Was that a good sign or a bad one?" I couldn't tell, but I knew I had to say something. "That's simply unacceptable. He's a senior manager. He can't just leave whenever it suits him." Neil replied, "No, we agree. This is the second time it's happened in just a few weeks. If he were a lower-level staff member, he would be close to being let go." "Have we tried calling him? Is it possible he might be in trouble?" I asked. Piers responded, "I haven't called, but Neil reached out to his home and spoke with Molly. She said she didn't know where he was. She saw him last night, but after that, he left, and she hasn't seen him since." That was all I said while looking at both of them. But my thoughts were, good job, Molly maybe. Piers understood my concern. It's all right. I told Neil what Peter had planned for last night. That's why he called instead of me. He might just want to check in without getting into a complicated situation. I turned to Neil. "Okay, what would happen to a junior staff member if they acted like this?" "It depends on the situation. If there was a serious car accident and their spouse died, we would be very understanding. If it's just someone who has a really bad hangover, then they would get a formal warning. There's a range of responses, but we've never had this issue with someone this senior." "What does his contract say?" "Nothing specific about this situation, only that holidays need to be planned with agreement and proper notice." "Okay, I don't see any reason to make an exception just because he thinks I am involved in this. I think that is what he is hoping for my understanding, so what do you think we should do?" Neil looked at Piers, then said, "All his time off should be counted against his holiday allowance or be unpaid. He should receive a formal warning letter, and if he isn't back by Monday, he should be let go. That's what we would do for a junior. It's tough, and if he'd called Piers for some agreement, it would be different." Piers added, "There is always a chance he could bring in a doctor's note claiming he is dealing with depression." I echoed Neil's thoughts. Then things would indeed change. Can I suggest something else? I suspect he has gone to their cottage in Wales again. It seems to be his go-to spot when he needs to be alone. Piers, I assume you have his phone number." Piers nodded. "Well, please give it to Neil to make a friendly yet formal call." Piers asked Neil, "Are you okay to do that?" Neil didn't seem too enthusiastic. "No, it's not a call I look forward to, but I'll do it." He then glanced at both me and Piers and got up. "Well, that's settled. Anyone want to join for lunch?" I replied, "No, thanks. I was planning to go to the canteen and sit at a random table, you know me." Piers looked at me. "How about you come with me to the Abbey and have lunch in the refectory there? A bit of public relations work before any issues arise might not be a bad idea." Neil said, "That sounds good to me. Maybe some talk will help you and Piers explain that this isn't your fault, no matter what Peter Davies says. But really, we don't know if he has said anything." I looked at Piers. "All right, but let's take separate cars so I can come back here after lunch." Piers arrived at the Abbey before me and was waiting when I got there. We split up for lunch in the dining hall. No one brought up Peter Davies, but I did hear Piers tell someone that whatever was wrong in Peter Davies' marriage, it was not Chris Bennett's fault. I thought that word, fault, was interesting. It could be my fault. I might have caused it, but it wasn't my responsibility. After lunch, I returned to Piers' office for a quick coffee. He naturally asked, "Sounds like Molly gave him a hard talk. Any thoughts on your next step?" "I'm thinking about some possibilities." I just can't see how we can go back to normal and pretend that Peter Davies didn't happen. If I had known then what I know now, it would have been my job to handle it. People make mistakes at work, especially during parties or when they're feeling upset or distracted. If it's just a one-time thing and they've learned from it, I think it's possible to move forward, as long as there are no other issues with the marriage. But what frustrates me is why she would choose to marry him in the first place. That seems so wrong and unwise. Maybe her mother influenced her more than you think. No, first of all, she was an independent adult. You can't just blame the mother. And if that were true, wouldn't Molly use that as an excuse? She doesn't think it was all Susan's fault, so why should I? Piers shook his head. But if you're not going to try to rebuild anything, then it probably won't matter anyway. I looked back at him. Not exactly. I think I'm starting to believe I should make an effort to build a friendly, supportive relationship with her. I need to ensure she has a good home and that the boys have a stable life. That is my responsibility. I just need to figure out how to improve my connection with Molly. Piers stared at me for a moment. It's interesting, isn't it? How do you rebuild a relationship with someone you were married 2 years ago? Counseling? No way. First, I doubt any counselor is trained to fix a rift from 5 years ago and turn it into a friendship. Second, I don't want anyone else involved in my personal life. Third, if Molly and I can't speak honestly to each other, then why are we even trying? All right, but I think we should have some serious talks to share our thoughts and feelings. That would make sense. After that, Piers and I went through a sort of study session on how to fix our friendship. We even started jotting down ideas on his whiteboard with labels like feelings, needs, wants, and how much time to spend on different things. It didn't take long, maybe 10 minutes, and wasn't very deep, but it helped clear my head. Then I returned to my main concern, but it doesn't make sense to me how she married him. I could try to understand the cheating part, and that's already a big hurdle, but her being with him for 4 years just makes her someone I don't want to know. Piers looked thoughtful for a moment, then said, "But you do want to understand her." He paused again and smiled. "I'm feeling some pressure at home. When Jeanette comes back from her weekend away, I need you to join us for dinner again." "I'd love to. But this time, let me take you out. You must have a favorite place in Bath." "How about, let's say next Saturday? I'm visiting Esther this weekend, and Jeanette will come back with me. So why not come over the following Saturday evening? I'll have made a reservation by then." "Sounds great." I smiled at him as I left and headed back to the office. When I entered Carol's office, she handed me the usual papers, plus an extra one. "That's the restaurant I mentioned. I've booked a table for 4 at 7 o'clock. I thought that would work. I can change or cancel it if needed." "No, let's challenge the birthday boy. Thanks, it sounds interesting." So not long after 6 o'clock, I rang Molly's doorbell to take them out for dinner. When she opened the door and saw me, she suddenly fell into my arms, shaking and crying. "Hey, what's wrong? Please tell me." I led her to the kitchen, but when I tried to help her to a chair, she said, "No, just hold me for a minute. I'll be okay soon." So I held her until she stopped crying and eventually sat down. She gave me a weak smile. "Sorry about that. It's been a rough day." Just then, Ben came running into the room. "Hi, Daddy, are we going?" "Just a moment, Mummy needs to talk to me. Go find Jamie and play until I'm ready, okay?" "Okay." He grumbled a bit, but left, glancing at his mother without saying anything. After he left, I turned to her. "What happened?" "It started last night. On Saturday, my lawyer sent a letter for Peter, and I slipped it under his door. He came home last night, and the first thing I saw was him standing here with a big bunch of sweet peas in one hand and a letter in the other. He was asking what it meant. I told him I needed to know what he wanted for our marriage. I didn't say I wanted him to leave me. I hoped to talk about it gently. "Okay," I said. He responded that he wanted to forgive me and that he loved me. He felt we had a good marriage until you returned. He believed he could get used to you being around, and he wanted everything to go back to how it was. Then he handed me the sweet peas. "Oh, what did you do next?" I told him he was right all along, that I did love you, and I thought our marriage was over. He seemed to panic. He said it was just a temporary feeling and that you didn't love me. He knew we had talked, and since you hadn't taken me back, he thought I could see that you never would. That made her upset. I broke the silence, saying, "But whether we get back together or not doesn't matter. Your marriage to him is wrong. It always has been, and it needs to end." She looked at me. "I know. I told him that, but he wouldn't accept it. He seemed to think I had to stay with him, that he needed me so much. I had no say in this. I even told him if he didn't divorce me, I would initiate the divorce myself. I think that shocked him, but then he started blaming you, saying you were the one encouraging me." "In a way, that's true," I admitted. "No, you just helped me realize what I needed to do for a long time." Anyway, he went on and on about how much he loved me and that I really loved him. Then he got very emotional, dropping to his knees, begging for another chance. I said there was no reason to try again, but I felt really bad. It was awful. "So how did it end?" I asked. "It ended when Trisha Marsden from across the street knocked at the door. He answered and took her away, and he never came back. I locked the door so he'd have to knock if he wanted in, giving me some warning." "Do you know where he is now?" "I don't know. Neil Davidson called this morning asking about him. Apparently, he didn't go to work. That worried me, so I checked. He wasn't at the gym and his car was gone. I guess he might have gone to Wales, but I haven't called to ask. I took my phone out and found Neil Davidson's number, then pressed dial. Thanks, Carol, for saving all the important numbers. Neil Davidson here. Neil, it's Chris. Did you find Peter Davies? Yes, you were right. He's at their holiday cottage. Did you tell him he needs to be careful? Yes, I had a talk with him. I tried to be understanding, but made it clear he needed to pay attention to what's happening. I told him that if he wasn't back by Monday, he would lose his job. What did he say? He said we would have to wait until Monday to see if he cared and if he wanted to work for that person. I guess you are the person he meant. I paused before answering, I suppose I owe him something. I usually treat people who call me names. Hasn't Piers told you? But I think I'll just keep being called names for him, without any drinks. I heard about that, and yes, avoid him if I were you. Thanks, Neil. We hung up the call. I looked at Molly. It's okay. He hasn't done anything reckless. He is in Wales. She gave a half smile. I guess he might have some trouble at work. Yes, he does. We can't have senior staff just not showing up when they feel like it. No, you probably can't. There's a childish side to Peter, but I didn't think he would do anything foolish. Peter is totally against drastic actions in situations like these. I thought he just went to Wales to think. By the way, you should have called me last night. Not that there was much I could do. No, it was something I needed to handle. It was just terrible seeing him like that. He does care about me, and it was hard. No, it probably was. I'm sorry, but you did the right thing. I paused, and for a moment we locked eyes. So what happened today? Susan came by around 4 to give Jamie his birthday gift. How is she? She seemed fine, happy, and acting like everything was normal. It felt strange. And I took her to the living room where the boys were watching TV. She gave Jamie his present, which was odd because it was a game for an Xbox. But Jamie doesn't have one, so I didn't understand. What did she say? She looked surprised he didn't have an Xbox. She thought he was getting one for his birthday. I don't know where she got that idea. I think I know, I said. I paused and took her hand, unsure how she would react to my next words. Peter came to see me in my office yesterday. He said he wanted to forgive everyone and move on. I thought he had come to terms with the divorce. Apparently, he spoke with Piers and gave him a similar impression. But I thought he looked good too, and Carol thought the same. She even mentioned it, but he said it was the sea air that helped him. I didn't think much of it then, but you don't get sea air halfway up a Welsh mountain, but you do in Weymouth. Her expression changed, and her eyes became sharp. They must have met over the weekend. I bet she encouraged him to try and reconcile last night. And she thought he was going to give Jamie a game console. She paused, then stood up to get a glass of water. I asked her if she met with Peter before we got married. She wouldn't really answer. She just said everything she did was to make me happy. How could she? She's my mother. So much for motherly love. What did you say to her? She shrugged. I told her to call next time before she visits. I think that surprised her. We usually had an easy relationship. She started to say she was their grandmother and had a right to see them. But I just said it would be better if she called first in the future. Whether she will or not. She shrugged again. We fell quiet. I didn't have much to say. I thought about telling her that I had heard about Peter trying to make amends, but I decided to save that for later. I walked over and gave her a quick hug. Are you going to be okay? Or should I tell Jamie he has to wait a bit longer? No. I need to freshen up, but it will be good for me to stop thinking for a while. My mind is overwhelmed. Eventually, we reached the restaurant, and it turned out to be more enjoyable than I had expected. As it often happens, the only one who didn't try something new was Jamie. Molly had crocodile, I had ostrich, and Ben had a bison burger, though I think it was more about the burger than the bison. But what did Jamie want? Lasagna. It was his birthday, so we didn't argue. I gave him my present, and he was really happy with the books until I gave him the iPod, which seemed even more exciting. Of course, I should have guessed that Carol had arranged for a big birthday ice cream, complete with candles and sweets. As I sat there, I could have felt very sentimental about how happy everything was. I had to remind myself that while a family can have 4 people, a marriage only involves 2, and those relationships need to last even after the kids grow up. When we got back, Ben was sent off to bed, but Jamie got half an hour on the computer to find music to download. Of course, half an hour was not enough, and he fought to stay on longer, but he lost. I was glad to see him head to his room with one of his new Harry Potter books, following clear instructions to read only 1 chapter before turning off the light. Once the boys were in bed, Molly opened a bottle of wine. I suddenly remembered that Sunday night long ago when I had done the same, wanting to talk about issues in my family. It took all my strength not to walk away. I looked at Molly. Are you going to be okay? Yes. I hope he doesn't come back and cause any problems. It was a bit frightening. I hadn't seen him act like that before. For a little while, he was really intense. Why don't you go and stay with Ralph? They have a big house, and you both share some things because of Susan. She thought about it before saying, I wonder what he will do. I thought she was talking about Ralph and remembered him telling me he said he would forgive her, and they would work things out. But everything we learned seems to show her in a worse light. I'm not sure what to do about her. I don't want to break ties with my own mother, but I'm struggling a lot. It would help if I knew how much she affected me. Those are tough questions. Look, I would feel better if you went to live with Ralph, with or without Susan. Can you check with your lawyer to see if moving out would cause any issues? If not, you could go there. You'd have someone to help out. She looked at me with hope. Do I need to find a new place? Can't we stay somewhere together? I guess my feelings showed, and she quickly said, I'm sorry. I shouldn't pressure you, I know that. It's just that I need more time. It's been almost 5 years. A week or 2 won't change much. I tried to smile kindly, but I'm starting to think of ideas that may not be exactly what you want, but they might be a lot better than what we have now, and a new beginning. She looked up, very curious. Is that true? You can't just say that and not explain. Yes, I can. I have to. I haven't figured everything out yet. I just feel we need to do something to provide Jamie and Ben with some security, but I don't know how. I thought you would be glad that I'm trying to think of solutions. Yes, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting how difficult this is for you. I know what I want, and it's hard to see that you have doubts. Just remember that I love you and would do anything for a second chance. I smiled. I could question that anything, but I worry you might really try. You could have come by and spoken to me on Saturday night. What happened then? And that's the point. I couldn't just come here and act like I did on Saturday. I went out knowing I wanted to have some fun without complications. I met a nice woman who I liked but didn't care deeply about, and we enjoyed our time together without any expectations. It was refreshing, but there was no future. I doubt we liked each other enough to even bother with lunch the next day. It was simply enjoyable, with no strings attached. Now I don't think I could have that with you. It would mean a lot, but right now, it would not be easy or light. Every moment would be filled with feelings and stress, and you know that well. There was a brief silence. Molly looked very pale, then she asked, Is that what you meant by saying you've changed? That we can't be together again? That you're someone who goes out and meets strangers for casual flings? No, not at all. I was completely true to you. You know that. I was loyal to Helene when we were together. That's who I am. When I'm committed, I want to stay that way. I don't feel the need for anyone else. But just to remind you, I'm not committed right now. Again, we were silent. I broke the quiet by saying, Ralph called me last night. He said you were upset about your worries regarding what I did on Saturday. I'm really sorry I hurt you. You should know I would never want to do that. But it had nothing to do with you. I'm single, and I went out Saturday night and met someone. And that was what I wanted. I regret that you found out and were hurt by it. You could have come to see me. I miss you. Do you know what I did Saturday night? I thought about you. I love you. I want you, and it feels wrong that you're out looking for what I would gladly give you. But there are conditions. And besides, you are married. I'm sorry, but you are, and that bothers me. I won't get involved with married women. I paused, and since she didn't say anything, I added, Look, if I ever commit to you again, I promise it will be easy for me to be totally devoted to you. But for now, I'm sorry, I'm free. We looked at each other, and I could see she understood, but I could tell I had hurt her. I felt bad about it for no clear reason. I tried to smile. If I had known you were thinking of me, I might have stopped by to see that. She smiled back. Seeing is a privilege of commitment. I told you so. I smiled, then changed the topic. Is it okay if I take the boys to football on Saturday? It will be a mix of work and fun. Sure. Can you pick them up from here and bring them back to Ralph's? I promised I would go over there. Of course. And that's how we left it. Not much happened for the rest of the week. Peter didn't return to work, so whether he would show up on Monday was important. Nobody offered me advice or shared their thoughts, which was a nice change. I made it all the way to Saturday without a problem. It felt almost like a little vacation. On Saturday, the football was great with all the kids. It was a big success, and John Wheeler started talking about having family days for his clients and potential clients. My boys loved it, and as soon as I got them back to Ralph's, they couldn't wait to tell him all about the day. Ralph stood in the middle of his front yard with his arms around both boys while they excitedly talked. He looked me in the eye and said, I'm sorry about Monday night. I was a bit too protective. I replied, It's okay. I understand. You must be feeling stressed too. But you need to think things through more. You should realize that several people's happiness depends on you. I turned away and said, Thanks. That's not what I wanted to hear. I found Molly in Ralph's kitchen. I didn't have much to say. I shared that I had moved my things to my new apartment that morning and gave her the new address. She immediately asked if she could visit, and I felt comfortable with that, so I said I'd call her. At that moment, Ralph walked in, put the kettle on for tea, and invited me to stay. No thanks, I'll let you be. I looked at Molly and said, Just one thing. When I took Jamie to the zoo last Sunday, he mentioned that it wasn't the zoo he really wanted to visit. He said he remembered going to what sounded like a safari park with you and Peter. It must have been a long time ago, because Ben doesn't remember it. Do you know what he meant? Molly blushed and looked a bit guilty. Yes, it was Longleat. You know, Lord Bath's place near Warminster. She hesitated, then continued. It happened before our divorce was final. Peter really wanted to take us all out for the day. I think he wanted to show he could be a family man. But I kept saying no. I noticed Ralph was trying hard to look like he wasn't listening, but it was clear he was paying close attention. But I encouraged her to go on. Then one day he showed up at my desk at the hospital and said he had won a family ticket for Longleat in a charity raffle. I still turned him down, but Susan kept insisting, so I eventually agreed to go. I thought the boys needed a fun day away from home instead of staying with sad me, so we went, and everyone had a great time, but I cried when we got home. I had a wonderful family day with the wrong person. Why couldn't I see that then? Just then, Ralph said, Hold on a minute, and he went off, leaving Molly and me looking at each other, confused. He returned with 3 large box files. He looked at us and explained, The last few days I've been wondering, if Susan could lie about what she did to come between you two, what else could she have lied about? I've been going through our old household accounts. Credit cards, phone bills, bank statements. It was time to see if there were any surprises. To be honest, I usually don't look at them when they arrive. We live comfortably within our means, and most bills are paid automatically. I mostly just organize the papers. Don't feel bad, I'm worse these days. I have Carol organize them for me, I said to make him feel better. I started with the phone bills, checking detailed accounts. I can go back 6 years, believe it or not. I keep adding new months until the file gets full, then I take out the oldest year. He suddenly pulled out a stack of detailed phone records with several lines highlighted in bright color. These are from the time when you two were separating. She was calling Peter 3 or 4 times a week. Some days, she called him 3 times in one day. This shows how close they were, I'm sorry. He handed the papers to Molly. You might want to look at these. Some dates might help you remember things, she said. Anyway, I then moved on to the credit cards. There was nothing too strange. A few charges around my birthday and Christmas that I didn't recognize at first. The rest were gas station and grocery bills. He looked up at me and smiled. And no, there aren't any charges from shady places, but there was one charge from Longleat that puzzled me. He opened a third box and pulled out a stack of bank statements. Here is her check clearing for the exact amount Peter paid her back. He pointed to a highlighted line on one of the pages. Both Molly and I reacted at the same time, saying, so she bought the family ticket, gave it to him, and he said he won it in a raffle. A long silence followed, which I eventually broke. Well, I guess it doesn't reveal anything new. We all suspected something, maybe not this direct on her part, but we felt something. I suppose it's nice to have evidence. Molly added, but this also shows that Peter was deceiving me. My relationship with him is built on lies. I don't know what to believe now. I feel like I was manipulated. She sounded very upset. I glanced at Ralph, who looked deep in thought. Ralph? Sorry, I can't really answer that. I wish I could. I wish I had known. All I remember is Susan being very firm that we shouldn't interfere. I thought she was just visiting Molly to help out, to listen, and to make dinner for the boys. Only once did she seem to take sides. One evening, she praised Peter, saying what a kind and understanding man he must be for being there for Molly when she was feeling so down about you, Chris. But I thought that was just a private conversation. There was a long silence. Then Ralph suddenly said, "Oh no, I'm so sorry." He hurried out of the room, covering his face. I turned to Molly. I don't think there's much more to say, at least not from me. Maybe you should go see your father and I will leave. I kissed her on the cheek and left. As I drove away from Ralph's house that Saturday afternoon, I was lost in thought. Could Susan and Peter have influenced Molly into marrying Peter? It seemed unlikely, and I wondered what Peter would gain from that. He must have known that a relationship based on lies wouldn't last. But I had a bigger question. Did it even matter? Yes, it did. Maybe it would help explain why she made the choice to marry him. But the idea of her being manipulated didn't sit well with me either. When I returned to my new flat, life took over. I had spent the morning moving, which mostly involved carrying boxes to the new place and leaving them on the floor. It took 2 trips in the car. That evening, I organized everything, taking a break when Mum called. She and Len had reached Glasgow and were set to take a cruise on Loch Lomond the next day. She sounded like she was enjoying herself. She asked how I was, and I didn't have much to report. I was glad that when I told her I was still thinking things over, she didn't press me for details. By 10 o'clock, I finished unpacking for the day, poured myself a drink, and turned on the news. It was then that I really took a good look at my new place. I was happy with it. It was stylish and felt like quality. It wasn't very big, but there was a second bedroom, which made me think the boys could stay over sometimes, especially if things became difficult between Molly and Peter. I also noticed that the place felt empty. I had lived in a company flat for 3 months, and that hadn't bothered me. But this one was mine, and it had very little of me in it, except for my clothes. I needed to change that. So I spent most of Sunday exploring shops for things to make the flat feel like home. By Sunday evening, I had spent quite a bit of money, but as I looked around, I was pleased with how it looked. I admired the set of crystal decanters I had bought, wondering what to fill them with. Brandy seemed like a good choice. Maybe I should get some sherry in case Ralph visits. I definitely need to ask Piers which whiskey to buy. That gave me a reason to call him in the morning. On Monday morning at work, Carol asked, "What about the next update?" "Not much, except..." I told her about Susan and the tickets for Longleat. It was the first time I saw Carol leave my office upset. She clearly felt she could not share her thoughts about my ex-mother-in-law with me. She left the room, clearly upset. I let her be upset while I called Piers. I got straight to the point. Is he in? Yes, he's in his office. I'm not sure how much he can do right now, but he's there. I told him he can skip his regular Wednesday research at the eye hospital since he needs to catch up on work here. He's also got to see you later because Neil has to give him some serious feedback and a formal warning. If I were you, I would be careful. He's pretty sure all his problems are because of you. I really don't care about that. The real reason I called is... Wasn't that it? That was part of it. But now I want to talk about something different. What whiskey should I keep in my decanter for a night drink? Ah, the search for the right drink. Personally, I'd choose something from the north of the Highlands. But for someone new to this, I suggest something old. Maybe from Speyside and well-aged. No specific name? No real suggestion? Is that all? He laughed. Yes, it's all about finding it for yourself. The journey matters more than the destination. So, research then. Those researchers are something else. We're all a bit difficult, he chuckled as I ended the call. On Monday evening, I drove back to the wine shop where I bought whiskey before. The same person was there, though he didn't remember me. I told him I was looking for an aged Speyside malt, and he showed me a 21-year-old Balvenie aged in port wood. I bought it because I liked port, and that was all I had to go on. It was more than $50 for the bottle, but I thought that was a fair start. Later that evening, I couldn't resist trying it. Someone once said they may not know much about art, but they know what they like. I don't know much about malt whiskey, but I know I like this one. As I enjoyed it, I started thinking about Molly. Part of me wished I had not come back to Bristol, but I wouldn't have rebuilt my relationship with Jamie and Ben. I could only imagine being friends with her, but there were too many memories of what we used to have. I started to worry about Peter. I thought he was back living in their gym next door. Would he cause trouble? It was a silly situation, him staying in the gym while she and the boys were next door. I needed to talk to her about finding a better place, away from him. In the end, I decided to call her. It was already past 11 o'clock. She sounded tired and quiet when she answered the phone. Hi, I hope I didn't wake you. No, I'm in bed, but not asleep. I was getting worried that Peter's back. Is he causing any trouble? I asked. No, not trouble. He knocked at the kitchen door earlier, which is something new. He usually just comes and goes. Anyway, he politely asked if we could sit down and talk. He said he has a right to be heard. What did you say? I said there was no point, but that I'd think about it. I promise I don't want to sit and talk with him. I just wanted him to leave. I only agreed to think about it so he would go tonight. There was a pause. Then I told her, he got a warning letter at work today. He's messing up his job. I figured that. It doesn't help. He is a good man and he loves me, but he's ruining his life. There was another long pause. She sounded tired, and I thought now wasn't the right time to share my true feelings about Peter. Instead, I suggested, could you find a babysitter for tomorrow evening after you've put the boys to bed? If you can, why not come down here for a drink and see my new place? You know I'd like that. I'm sure Ralph would babysit. He feels so guilty about what Susan did. On Saturday after you left, I found him in tears. I'd never seen my father cry before. I couldn't say what she did didn't matter because it did. I wish we understood how much. How much our splitting matters. Everything. Don't you know that? Yes, it was the worst thing that ever happened to me, too. But I didn't mean that. I wanted to know how much Susan and her connection with Peter affected everything going wrong. You want to know that? Imagine how I feel. I think I'm losing my mind. She sounded bitter. There's nothing in that part of my past that I can understand as real. I feel like I was just pushed to feel certain ways. We don't have all the answers, but maybe we can talk about it tomorrow evening. Yes, I'll look forward to it. I love you, Chris, and I'm sorry. I didn't say anything, knowing I couldn't respond the way I wanted. After a moment of silence, I heard her hang up. I went to bed thinking about how much a grown person could be influenced by others. It was her signature on the wedding certificate with Peter, not Susan's. I was open to talking and trying to understand, but I was skeptical. First thing Tuesday morning, Piers called me. Hi, Chris, I thought I'd call. You know Myra has set up this meeting about the future of the site? Well, she's moved it here, and I guess I should invite Peter. What do you think? My heart raced. Maybe I was scared, but I didn't want to confront Peter in front of a developer, an architect, and my team. I felt uneasy. I didn't realize she moved it. I don't have time to drive to the Abbey and back for just one meeting. It's not that kind of day for me. If she insists on having it at the Abbey, I won't be there. But if we hold it as planned in your office, would you be? Piers asked. Yes, I replied with more excitement than I truly felt. Unless Myra has a strong reason for holding it there, I say we stick to the original plan. I'll let Peter know he's invited and see how he responds. I have a hunch he might have something else to do, but we can't know for sure. Sounds like a plan. Will you talk to Myra? I'll inform Carol. I thought to myself, I better tell her to be prepared, and at least a strong drink would help if I needed it. I'll call her right away. By the way, Jeanette insists you come by on Saturday. She prefers talking at home instead of in restaurants, as if she would let you skip out. I smiled. I'm looking forward to seeing Jeanette. She knew Molly well. I'd like to hear her thoughts on everything. Oh, by the way, I picked a 21-year-old Balvenie. Is that good? He laughed. I can't say until I try it. Any Tuesday evening this week is fine. I chuckled. Too bad for you. I can't make it, but you can tease Jeanette with this. Molly's coming over tonight. He wished me luck and hung up. Peter didn't show up for the meeting in my office. Instead, Piers brought a research project manager with him. She was friendly and smart, and when I asked Piers about her in private, he mentioned she might be a good fit as a future deputy if anything happened to Peter. After the meeting, I felt guilty for not facing Peter at the Abbey. As managing director, I shouldn't have places I avoid in my own company, so I was in a mixed mood when Molly rang the entry phone that night. I opened the door for her and waited. When she came upstairs, I thought she looked relaxed and nice. As I greeted her with a kiss on the cheek, her perfume surprised me. It was different from her usual scent, but very pleasant. You smell nice, I said. She smiled. Thank you. It's L'air du Temps. Peter gave it to me for my birthday. That felt like a sting. For a moment, our eyes met, and she knew the impact of her words. But she said nothing, and I hoped my smile hid my feelings. I showed her the flat, and she seemed to enjoy it. When we reached the small second bedroom, I mentioned that I hoped the boys could come and stay sometimes. Her response made me uneasy. They're a bit. We talked for a while as we returned to the living room, and I poured us some glasses of wine. We discussed how they had dealt with our previous divorce and how their lives were changing again. I used this as a chance to suggest that she and the kids should go live with Ralph. I didn't think she really wanted to do that, but she seemed hesitant. I asked her why. She looked at me and said, because I hoped. The expression in her eyes showed what she was hoping for. No. You know that's not going to work. It will take time if it happens at all. She appeared quite disappointed, but soon accepted it and replied, and I'm a bit worried about Susan coming back. At some point, Ralph will have to let her home. Right now, they only meet for lunch once or twice a week, but I expect he might let her return, and I don't want to live with her. I smiled. I completely understand. Does she know about your plans to divorce Peter? And what's happening with that? I'm not sure if Susan knows. Who really knows who talks to whom these days? But I did speak with my lawyer today. We haven't heard back from Peter, so I told her to start getting ready for my divorce from him. I'll see her again on Thursday. Good, was all I could respond. There was a long pause, a silence. I wondered how to bring up the distance between us. But Molly spoke first. The other day, you said you were moving forward in your thoughts. Can you tell me more about that? Even if you haven't figured it all out. Please, Chris. I looked at her and said, all right. I know that whatever feelings we have, we can't just go back to how things were. I know that's what you want. It seems like everyone wants that like a perfect ending. But this is real life, and we can't rewind time no matter how much we wish we could. As I saw her face lose color and her eyes begin to fill with tears, she pleaded, couldn't you at least try? I know I hurt you, and it's been over 4 years, but I still care for you. Please, Chris. Before she broke down completely, I said, But that doesn't mean we can't work on building something new together. She looked at me with some interest and hope, and I continued. Maybe we can create a happy, supportive friendship, free of pain and jealousy, something that provides stability and love for the kids. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Well, how do you think we can reach a point where we feel comfortable with one another? Where we understand and share our lives without past regrets and painful memories, but not share love, not go back to being a true couple? I'm sorry, Molly, but I just don't think that's possible. But I wish I could see you and talk to you without feeling hurt when you bring up that the perfume I like was given by Peter. Time might help, but I want more. I want to be more than just a friend. Thinking time would fix everything felt too simple. I said, I had dinner with Myra last Monday. I spent 2 hours at work with her today, and I had lunch with her and some others. How does that make you feel? Don't pretend you didn't feel a little uneasy. It's hard to move past that. I really don't know how. What are your thoughts? She didn't answer my question. Instead, she said, Didn't you say you were done with her? But you went to dinner with her only a week ago? I didn't say I took her out to dinner. I said we had dinner together. I paid, yes, but she's just a friend. An attractive one, sure, but just a friend. She knew something significant was going on in my life, and she wanted to talk. So we had dinner. I paused, thinking, there's never a perfect moment for this. I knew Peter would show up with flowers last Monday wanting to make things right. I assumed he wanted to take you to dinner at your favorite place. So, since Myra wanted to talk, I suggested we meet at a different restaurant. She looked at me, curious, and then asked, How did you know? Because he told Piers, and Piers told me. We figured out that Peter didn't explain things well or misled us on purpose. I thought about telling you, but it probably wouldn't have helped. He was determined to fix his marriage. Then she smiled. Were you worried I might go to dinner with him? No, I wasn't worried, just curious, concerned. She looked at me with a small, triumphant smile. It was a look I'd seen before, usually over silly things like winning a game. I had to wonder, was I feeling jealous? I admitted a little. You have to remember that I loved you deeply, and old habits are hard to break. Then let's give it another chance. What if we could rebuild something? Please don't shut the door on that forever. Please, Chris. I'm not. If two people are spending time together and sharing parts of their lives, and we have our 2 sons who connect us, then anything is possible. But I need to be honest. I don't believe it will. But would you try to build a relationship? Maybe through counseling or just meeting to talk? Whatever you want. I don't want to raise your hopes. You asked me what I was thinking, and I'm trying to share that with you. Right now, I'm not promising anything, except that I want to make sure you can give my boys a good life. But Piers McBain questioned how we can rebuild things after everything that has happened. You talked to Piers about this? Yeah, he brought it up. He also mentioned counseling, but I said no. We talked about everything we need to cover the past, the future, why we're in this tough situation. It's all so complicated. There's the reality of what happened and how it made us feel both then and now. You spoke to Piers, and I spoke to Heather Washington at the hospital. She's a counselor. I really don't want a counselor involved. If we can't talk to each other, then it doesn't seem worth it to try. I don't want someone else prying into our lives. Thanks a lot. What do you think I'd do as a dietitian? I looked at her and realized I had gone too far. Sorry. I just don't want to share this with someone else. This is ours. What we go through matters most. Whatever anyone else thinks or wants, we need to solve this ourselves. That's how I feel. Heather has good ideas for handling things. Fine, talk to her if we get stuck, but that's if we even start. She didn't like that, but I could see her thinking as I poured us more wine. After a moment, she asked, What would it take for you to be willing to start? To talk to me? I regretted her question. There are so many things I struggle with, like why you chose to be with him. That's a tough one. She started to cry. You know it wasn't like that, but you're right. There's really no answer. I've asked myself why over and over. Why did I throw it all away? I'm sorry. I gently squeezed her hand. Honestly, I'd probably be kinder to you than you are to yourself. She looked at me through her tears. I'm sorry. I know you are. I gave her hand another squeeze. The real struggle for me isn't just that moment, but everything that led up to you marrying him. That's where I find it hard to respect you. She didn't like hearing that. I wish I could explain it too. Some of it has to do with Susan's influence. You can't blame her for everything. You wrote that letter to me. Your name is on it, not hers. She frowned and took a sip of her drink. Then she wiped her eyes. I don't hold Susan responsible for everything. That letter was one of those odd things about what Susan was up to. Looking back, I see some of the things she did that hurt me and influenced my feelings. She kept insisting that I should give you time to figure out if you wanted me back. She often said that you probably wouldn't, that you were too proud to take me back. I think that really pushed me deeper into sadness. I shook my head. How could a mother act like that? But it was more than just that. I remember at least 2 times when she physically stopped me from seeing you. When I was really upset and ready to go out the door to see you, she held me back. You can't go and see him like this. You'll only make things worse. Come have some tea and calm down. Go see him later when you feel better. And of course by then the moment was gone. If only, I repeated. But when I was writing that letter, she was actually helpful. I don't get it. I talked to Ralph about it the other day. One afternoon I quickly wrote a letter to you asking you to take me back. It was on the table when Susan came over. She used to visit every day to check on me. I was so thankful for her time, but now I wonder. Anyway, she saw it and wanted to know what it was. I let her read it. She said it was too emotional and that we could do better. Then she sat down with me and helped me write a clearer letter, one that wasn't just feelings but still expressed how sorry I was and that I wished you'd take me back. If that's what you thought you said, then I'd suggest you have a talk with your English teacher, because it hurt me deeply. Why? Well, first of all, as soon as I opened it, I saw it was typed. Where's the heartfelt feeling in a typed letter? That was Susan's idea. She thought it should be typed, and I went along with it. But it was the words that mattered, and they really expressed my feelings. I sighed. I wish I still had it. I threw it away. For a moment, getting rid of it felt good. But I read it twice, and thought about some of the phrases many times. I paused and asked, "Do you think Susan changed it?" No, I promise you, they were all my words. I checked it carefully before I signed it and sealed it in the envelope myself. Every word came from my heart. I shrugged. Then you have a strange way of understanding the English language. That special afternoon, I remember that phrase about your time with Peter, and that you thought you loved me. Even our past love felt like a mistake to you. Did I say that? I can't remember the words I used for that afternoon. I know I said I thought I loved you, but I think I just wrote that in the letter. You might have misunderstood it. You said it bothered you that it was typed out. Maybe you didn't even read it. I took a sip of my wine. Maybe. I was really hurt by everything. I don't think I was angry when I got the letter, but I was still upset. I might not have read it closely, but even so. Ralph has tried to help me understand how much I hurt you. I'm sorry. I was so caught up in my own troubles that I didn't see yours. And Susan told me you'd be okay. She said men get over these things. Maybe she was trying to pull me away from you. That makes her help with the letter so strange, even if you didn't like that it was typed. Maybe that was her way of trying to make things right, so she could feel like she did something good. Yes, I think so too. It's like one small good deed can't erase all the wrong she's done. I'm not sure I can ever forgive her. I don't want to break away from my own mother, but just give it some time. See if she apologizes when she realizes her actions have come to light and that Peter is leaving. It's on her to say she's sorry. We both sat quietly for a few minutes, finishing our wine. Then Molly asked, "Do you want to take the boys this weekend? It's another bank holiday." Yes, since Easter was late, we seem to have a short break this time. Of course, I want them for a day. How about Monday? I could take them to Longleat if that's where they want to go. It's a nice place for a day out. That sounds great. They had a fun time there last visit. It was just me who didn't. They'll enjoy it. I really appreciate how easy you've made it for me to reconnect with them. I think keeping your memory alive for them helped me too. You were away for over 3 years, and you still remembered their birthdays, Christmas, and the new school terms. It's no surprise to me. But in some ways, it hurt because it reminded me of how good a man I lost and how I pushed their father away. I owe them so much. Her eyes looked sad again. I stood up and hugged her gently. Don't worry. Children adapt. They will be fine. We both knew the evening was coming to an end, so I walked her to the front door, kissed her on the cheek, and said goodbye. After she left, I went back inside and poured myself a glass of whiskey. As I enjoyed my drink, I couldn't stop thinking about how I still couldn't understand the smart Molly I knew, who had just been here a little while ago, and the poor choices she made that led her life to be so difficult. For the next 3 days, I barely had a moment to think about Molly or what might happen next. I spent 2 days in London, and I only took 20 minutes to meet with the old man. We discussed the idea of developing the Marston Abbey site, and he insisted we work with the public relations team. Companies that sell historic buildings can face big problems if the locals or special interest groups don't support it. I also mentioned that I was considering what to do with the Exeter operation and whether to sell it or allow a management buyout if Stephen Hobbs could organize it. He ended the meeting with a quote from the Bible. When I left his office, I asked Pamela, "Can I borrow your Bible?" And from the other room, I heard the old man say, "Let my people go." Pamela looked at me, and we both chuckled. Then she surprised me by saying, "I really like Carol." "So do I replied. "She's the best of her kind in the group, I think." I looked at her and clearly stated, "And she's staying in Bristol." Pamela smiled. "Just testing you. I want to make sure you know how good she is." As I sat on the train that Friday evening, heading to Bristol, I started to feel a bit paranoid. I wondered what Pamela's comments about appreciating what I have really meant. Could it be that Carol had talked to Pamela about my situation, and this was her secret way of advising me? Common sense told me that was silly, and even if it were true, I couldn't see how it related to my life. By the time I got home that Friday, I was exhausted and felt grimy from my trip. I ran a nice deep hot bath and was just about to step in when Mum called. They were in St. Andrews now, and Len was thinking about taking up golf. I told her I was trying to understand why Molly chose to marry Peter. I shared some stories about Susan's games, and that kept us talking for a while. Even though I didn't make any real progress in my thoughts, talking to Mum was calming and helped me relax. She might not have helped me think, but she listened well, which was perhaps the best thing she could do. It was around 11 o'clock on Saturday morning when Ralph called. He asked if he could come over to see me, and he arrived about 11:45. I let him in and asked, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" "I'm about to make one." "Sure, thanks." He followed me into the kitchen and watched as I made a couple of mugs of instant coffee. We exchanged small talk about the weather. When I handed him a mug, he sat on a stool at the breakfast bar while I leaned against the kitchen counter. "So what's this about, Ralph?" "It's about that letter Molly sent you." He paused. "Look, Chris, I had no idea there was a letter until you mentioned it in my shed. No one told me. Susan couldn't say anything because we weren't supposed to get involved, right?" There was a hint of bitterness in his voice. "Even if you had known, it probably wouldn't have changed much. You might have stopped her from sending it, which could have saved me some pain, but things would have ended up the same." "Well, anyway, I spoke to Molly about it. Or more like she talked to me when I asked how Tuesday night went. It surprised me that you and Molly see things so differently. I guess our memories play tricks on us." Ralph kept going. "So I asked Molly about it. I don't know if she told you, but one afternoon she wrote you a long letter out of frustration. By chance, Susan saw it, read it, and told Molly it was hard to read, which might have been true. Call me suspicious if you want, but when Susan got involved, I became worried. I felt the same way, but Molly promised me she checked and sealed it in the envelope herself. That should keep it safe this time." I wasn't surprised Susan wanted to type it up. Remember, we had just gotten our first home computer. We still have it, but I should really get a new one. I had used computers at work for years, but it was all new to Susan. She taught herself how to use MS Word and typed everything. She even made 2 beautiful binders of her cake recipes, each recipe in those plastic covers to keep them clean. I think she typed everything back then. It was her new hobby. She probably even typed her shopping lists. I smiled, and Ralph continued. "So it made sense for Susan to want to type it. especially if Molly's handwriting was a bit messy and they wanted to make edits. Now, here's where I need to apologize. I got a little curious. I asked Molly if she had a copy of the letter and if I could read it, but she didn't. Anyway, last night, I decided to check the computer. Amidst the many letters from the bank, the gas company, and other places, there was one special letter from Molly. Ralph took out 3 folded papers from his inside pocket. "Chris, I know this might bring back some tough memories, but can you tell me if this is the letter you got from Molly?" He handed me the papers. I looked at them quickly. The first page had an address and date. The second page contained 5 paragraphs, and the third page held just 1 paragraph with Molly's signature. I glanced at all 3 pages and said, "Yes, this is it. I can't understand how Molly thought this would help." "No, Chris. I need you to read it again and confirm if it's the same letter." I hesitated because I didn't want to revisit those feelings, but Ralph patiently waited. Finally, I read through every painful word and set the letter down. "Yes, that's the letter. Are you saying Susan was smart enough to change it without Molly knowing?" Molly was upset, but that seems unbelievable. Ralph then handed me another set of 3 pages. "This is Molly's letter." I took it from him. "Molly checked it this morning and insists this is the letter she wrote, just like you insist about the other one." I paused to read this new letter. It had a similar structure with 6 paragraphs on the second page, and the ending was the same as the first letter. When I finished, I looked at Ralph, feeling tears welling up. The letter in my hands was a heartfelt request from Molly to fix things, wanting to bring our family back together. If I had received that, I would have gone straight to her house right away. I really would. "I understand. I'm really sorry you didn't get it." For a moment, we just stared at each other, both close to tears. Finally, Ralph asked, "What do you notice about the 2 letters?" I held them in my hands. Molly's true request for a second chance is in that short paragraph on the second page, which is missing from my letter. Other than that, they aren't too different. That special afternoon I received is that dreadful afternoon in Molly's letter. The differences are small, but significant. I looked closely at both letters again and noticed that "I love you" became "I thought I loved you." I turned to Ralph. I guess this was Susan's influence, but how? "Check the 3rd pages." I did, noticing they were the same. "Exactly. I talked to Molly, and I think Susan gave her a version of a letter, neatly typed. Molly looked it over and signed it. Then she put it in an envelope that Susan had brought, which was already addressed. She sealed it and put a stamp on it. According to Molly, Susan offered to mail it on her way home. The idea became clearer to me. All Susan had to do was open the original letter, switch the 2 first pages with the bad version, keep Molly's signature on the 3rd page, put it in a new envelope with a new stamp, and it would be done. Ralph nodded. "That makes sense. The letters are so similar that you and Molly could discuss them and have different opinions on their meaning without realizing it. 90% of the words are the same. You and Molly have talked about them without knowing." I sipped my coffee while it got quiet between us. I then said, "It's a bit risky, but she got away with it." "What else could she do? Molly was set on writing to you." There was another long pause. I looked at Ralph and said, "You once called my ex-wife a foolish person." Ralph smiled, and I asked, "Can I call your wife a selfish person?" He smiled faintly. "Right now, you could put that on her headstone for all I care." I finished my coffee and asked, "How's Molly handling it?" "What do you think?" "She's shocked and upset. Right now, she says this is the final straw. She doesn't want to see Susan again. She's cut ties with her. In fact, she thought about writing a letter to tell her that. At least she found some humor in it, thinking she might apologize if she wrote it in an emotional mess." I took a moment to absorb what I had just heard. Then I asked, "Do you want another coffee? I think I'll make myself one." "No, thanks." I turned to boil the kettle again and headed to the fridge for milk. I asked over my shoulder, "And what will you do now?" "I'm meeting her tomorrow for lunch at a pub just outside Blandford Forum. I plan to lay out both versions of the letter and see what she says. If she doesn't have a good explanation or doesn't apologize sincerely, then any lawyer or judge would likely think that's unreasonable behavior, don't you agree?" I recognized that phrase. Gradually, I turned around and said, "Divorce? Are you serious? How long have you two been married?" 37 years in September, but yes, divorce is on my mind. I finished making my coffee and watched him. Ralph stared out the window for a moment before turning back to me. In the last few weeks, while I've made her stay in Weymouth, I've thought a lot about our marriage. What is it, beyond a comfortable routine? She shows no interest in the garden. I don't care about her baking group or making cakes for any charity that wants to hold a coffee morning or a sale. We go out for lunch at a country pub once or twice a week. We sit at the dining table and talk about the news or about Jamie and Ben. In the evenings, we watch TV, but we don't really talk. She doesn't want to travel, but I have dreams of seeing plants in their natural homes. We share a bed, and sometimes we are close, but that's about it. But that was enough. Yes, it was. But now I have to face a woman every day at the dining table who feels secretive and selfish. I don't want to do that. I'm sorry. I never imagined this would happen, and I didn't want it to happen to you and Susan. What does Molly think? She hasn't said anything. I haven't told her yet. I don't think I will until I've made my decision, but Susan has to change something big to bring me back from this. For a while, Ralph asked me about what would happen with money if he and Susan got a divorce. He knew they would have to split their belongings equally, which would mean selling their house. What worried him was how much of his pension Susan would get. After we talked about that for a bit, I asked, "Want to grab a pie and a pint? I found a new pub and I haven't tried it yet. I'm sure we can get lunch there." "I'd love that," Ralph replied happily. Once we ordered our food and got our drinks, we found a table to sit at. Ralph took a sip of his drink and looked at me. "You know, I think this is only the third time we've been to the pub together. Peter always wanted to take me out. I think he knew I was the one he needed to impress." "You've got a good sense of people. Tell me about Peter. What's he like, or what do you think he will be like in the coming months?" He shrugged. "He seems very relaxed on the outside, very social." I smiled. "Can I join in on that?" Ralph chuckled. "You know what I mean, but sometimes I get a feeling that he's a bit immature under those polished social skills." "What do you mean? Why do you think that?" "From what I've seen over the years, I don't think Peter really understood women until later in life, maybe in his 20s. Before that, I think he was what I would call a bookworm. Jamie would probably call him a nerd. But once he figured things out, I think he tried to make up for lost time. I'd guess he had quite a few experiences before Molly came into his life." Just then, our food arrived. But between bites, Ralph continued, "Anyway, after your decree Nisi was granted, he would come to pick up Molly from our house some evenings when we were babysitting the boys." A lot had been happening before that under Susan's leadership. Anyway, I often felt like I was answering the door to a young boy. It reminded me of when Molly was 17 and her first boyfriend started showing up. There was an eager innocence about him, as if Molly was his first love. He seemed excited and a bit obsessed. I remember that feeling. "Oh, the innocence of youth," I replied. Ralph paused, chewing thoughtfully. "Well, imagine adding the experience and money of adulthood to how you were. How did you feel when your first love turned you down?" Her name was Yvette Cooper. She told me that Charlie Taplin had asked her out, and she was going with him. I was heartbroken. I felt so lost, like I could do anything to show her how much I cared. I took a moment to reflect. If you're right, God help us, he could do anything. Yes, but he is also quite smart and a bit more mature than you were then. Still, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets very upset and doesn't act sensibly. I hope I'm wrong. Maybe he will just give up. He must realize he doesn't have a chance. Yes, he was the one who claimed she loved me. So deep down, he knows the truth. Let's hope he thinks clearly. After that, we finished our lunch and walked back to my flat. Ralph didn't come in. He got into his car and drove home. As he left, I noticed he hadn't asked me what I was planning to do. I was thankful for that because I didn't really know how to answer. Once I was inside, I watched sports on TV until it was time to get ready to visit Piers and Jeanette in Bath. On my way, I stopped to buy a big bouquet of flowers for Jeanette. I made a small detour to my whiskey shop and picked up a few miniatures of different malts that I hoped were special. When I arrived, after a warm welcome, Piers graded each of my 6 miniatures out of 10, and I ended up with a total score of 47. Then we sat down together. Jeanette said she wanted to hear all the details of my story, but we wouldn't talk about it until dinner was served. Instead, I got to hear all about Edward, the joys of being a grandparent, and how his other two grandparents were doing everything wrong, though I avoided the video part. But just as we started our meal, Jeanette said, "All right then, let's begin from the start." I looked at her. "But I know Piers has shared most of it with you." "Yes, but he's a scientist. He only shares the facts. He never talks about the expressions on faces or the tone of voices, all the important things." So, with Piers sitting between us, I told Jeanette everything as well as I could remember. I hoped he wasn't too bored, but he helped me explain some things to Jeanette. It took a long time to share everything, and I only skipped over the details of Molly's limited romantic life in her marriage. I mentioned that it was limited, but I didn't go into specifics. For some reason, I felt I should be respectful of Peter's privacy while speaking with his boss. Jeanette asked a few questions, but I could tell that hearing the story from my perspective was really important to her. I finally shared what I knew about Peter and Susan working together, as well as Susan's lies and tricks, ending with the story about the letter. After I finished, there was a long silence. Then Jeanette said, "Tell Molly to call me. I want to meet her and talk. It's time to fix things with her." I was surprised. "I thought you were against cheating. No matter what, she betrayed me. But I'm glad you said that, and I will definitely let her know. You know she doesn't understand why you and Peter split. He never explained it." Jeanette smiled. "Then I can let her believe it was Peter's fault, which is mostly true." She paused. "But you're right. I grew up as the daughter of a preacher and still go to church regularly. Aside from a few gray areas, cheating is wrong to me." She looked directly at me. "And that includes your moment with Molly a few weeks ago. But I was also raised to be understanding of people's mistakes and to forgive those who hurt me." Not much was said after that until Piers finished serving dessert and asked, "Can you forgive her, Chris? Do you want to try?" Honestly, that one moment of weakness feels pretty small to me right now. Things change in importance so often. What mattered last week seems minor this week and vice versa. I don't think a single mistake, especially one influenced by alcohol or circumstances, should destroy a family or a good marriage. It's something to move past and recover from. I smiled and added, "Maybe it's the nearly 5 years since that has eased the pain. Perhaps I've had too many disappointing moments with the wrong person in that time, which has made me a bit more understanding, though that's not my main concern right now." I noticed Piers and Jeanette were listening closely. "I don't want you to think I don't care. I don't like the idea of my wife being unfaithful." Piers asked, "If you had known then what you know now, would you have forgiven her?" I can't really answer that. In theory, I'd like to say yes. But I was really hurt and angry, and I didn't think I could think clearly. Jeanette decided to take a different approach. "Was having spontaneous moments part of your and Molly's life? You don't seem like a couple that scheduled everything." I smiled, thankful for her straightforward question. She was open about things that most people would avoid, and I appreciated that. "Yes, you have to be a bit careful with 2 young boys around, but before they came along, yes." So for Molly, it wasn't surprising to suddenly want to connect when the moment felt right. It was just that the moment was right, but he was the wrong person. Still, he clearly worked hard to be the one for that moment. I liked how she expressed that. "You could say that." Piers looked around the table. "Why don't you sit down comfortably while I make some coffee?" So we did. While Piers was in the kitchen, Jeanette asked a simple question. "Do you still love her?" I found it difficult to answer that. I tried to explain how I felt about Molly. Part of my love was still there, but it blended with my memories, the hurt, anger, and my loyalty to the mother of my sons. Everything felt so mixed up. Piers returned with the coffee, interrupting my unclear thoughts. Then he sat back and asked, "So, what are you worried about this week? What stops you from seeing what's left?" I sighed. This was the question I needed, but I wasn't sure how to respond. Eventually, I said, "I know that Susan used every trick to create a permanent divide between Molly and me. I believe Susan and Peter worked together to push Molly into that new relationship. But I still can't get over that she let it happen. I can't shake the feeling that some part of her wanted it to happen too. If that's true, then maybe we are where we are. Not because she found her true love, but because her next love didn't work out as well as she wanted. I looked at Jeanette, hoping for her thoughts instead of a clinical answer from Piers. She knew Molly, and maybe her perspective would give me something new. But it was Piers who began to respond. That's really about trust. You either believe her and trust her, or you don't. But Jeanette interrupted. No, I don't think that's what Chris is worried about. Isn't it more about how you can't reconcile her behavior back then with the woman you thought you knew and maybe even the woman you see now? I felt relief wash over me. Yes, that's exactly it. I can't explain what happened after her moment of poor judgment. We all drank our coffee in quiet. Then Jeanette looked at Piers. Maybe it's like Claire after Roger's passing. Piers shrugged. Jeanette turned to me. Roger and Claire lived near us in our first family home. Claire was an accountant and Roger worked at a bank. Their garden was next to ours. They had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, just like us. Ours were Fraser and Esther. We weren't very close friends, but we got along fine. One day, Claire came to my door in tears. I think I was the only one around when she needed someone. Roger had gone to the hospital for a few days of tests. He was 31, and the doctor had told them that morning he had cancer. I interrupted. I'm sorry to hear that, Jeanette. I know this story might connect to our conversation, but I recently heard similar anecdotes from Myra Hepstead. I was hoping you could just tell me if you think Molly was simply following her mother's advice without thinking. I didn't really know Molly back then. Not well, anyway. I guess Peter didn't introduce us until he was close to getting her to the altar, or at least the registry office. But please let me answer your question as best as I can. Okay, sorry, I said, and took another sip of my coffee. After that, Roger fought his illness for 2 years. There were operations, treatments, breaks, and holiday trips. Then, 2 years later, the doctors told Claire there was nothing more they could do. Roger had about 2 months left. They admitted him to a hospice. He passed away 7 weeks later. I did a quick calculation. So he was 33. I'm sorry, that's very young. Jeanette nodded. Yes, it is. People came together to help. Claire's freezer was filled with meals. Neighbors took her kids on trips, but after the initial rush, it seemed like I was the only one who really checked on her. Her family lived far away. I made it a point to visit every day, make sure she was eating, and that she was taking care of the kids. I let her talk, which is what she needed. This continued for weeks. Okay, I said, still not quite seeing the connection. Jeanette smiled. Stay with me. There's a reason for this story. I noticed that when Claire didn't know what to make for dinner, and I mentioned simple pizza, the next day her kids would have pizza too. If I said that Piers and I were going to watch Morse on TV that night, you could bet Claire would join us. She started coming to my church even though I hadn't invited her. I didn't want to force my beliefs on her. She had become quite reliant on me, almost unable to make her own decisions. I don't think she even realized it, and it felt unsettling. You were really affected by it, I remember, Piers said. I told you to talk to our doctor about it. And I did, Jeanette replied. I also spoke with people at the hospice where Roger had passed away. They told me it wasn't unusual and suggested she needed some professional support. And did she get it? I asked. Yes. I used the influence I had to help her see a grief counselor. That worked. A year later, she moved to be closer to her family. A few years after that, she met a new partner, and now she's happily married to a farmer in New Zealand. In her last Christmas card, she wrote that she manages the holiday part of their farm business. She has 4 full-time staff and 21 part-time staff. It seems like her mental health was just fine all along. Piers leaned in. She was shocked and heartbroken. She had 2 years to prepare for Roger's passing and 7 weeks to know it was certain. Yet when it happened, she became entirely reliant on a neighbor. Molly shifted from being a happily married wife and mother to a single parent. Convinced that her partner now disliked her, all within weeks, she turned to the one person she thought she could confide in, her mother. He paused and then added, and Claire believed it was a challenge from above. Molly thought it was all her fault. Jeanette looked directly at me. I don't know what Molly was like back then, but could she have become entirely dependent on her mother? I think it's quite possible. She may not even realize how much she relied on her, but you know her, Chris. You'll have to decide for yourself. After that, I was probably not the best company. But Jeanette and Piers didn't complain. I was lost in thought. The only conclusion I reached was that, while I had been shocked and upset about what Susan did to Molly, I was now starting to feel a personal dislike for what she had done to me. At some point, Piers had placed a small glass of whiskey on the table in front of me. "It's my Highland Park. You look like you could use it." I smiled, took the glass, and sipped it. "I appreciate it. I have a lot on my mind." After a nice goodbye with Jeanette and Piers, I was almost out the door when Piers said, "If you need anything, just let us know. It must be tough." I smiled, though it felt a bit weak. "Thanks. And remember, we need to continue your lessons in the true religion, a gift from my ancestors." Now I did smile. "You just want my Balvenie whiskey." Driving home, I felt like it was time to decide. I thought I understood everything about Molly and what had happened. On Sunday, I loaded my bike onto my car and drove out to Somerset. I parked and rode quietly. I made sure not to push myself too hard, stopping at 3 nice pubs, but only having a drink during lunch. While cycling along the peaceful country lanes, I had the time to think, which is what I needed to do. I needed to decide whether to try and build a new relationship with Molly or just walk away and see my boys on the weekends. As I drove to Molly's house on Bank Holiday Monday morning, I had a plan. I would take the boys to the Longleat Safari Park. Then, when I got back, I would ask Molly if we could talk. I thought I might pick up some Chinese food for later when the boys were in bed. We could have a serious conversation about everything that had happened and what we wanted for the future. Sort of like counseling without a counselor. I wouldn't promise anything else. Just talking. I wanted to make it clear that my hope was for us to come out as true friends, nothing more. I knocked on Molly's door quietly, unsure if Peter was home. She answered, looking good, better than I had seen her in a while. She wore a nice cotton blouse and linen trousers, looking fresh and lovely. I glanced at the gym and she smiled. "It's fine. I think he's gone to Wales for the weekend." "Good. I haven't told the boys where you're taking them, but they will love it. The weather is nice for a day out." Just then, Jamie came out. I said, "With help from your mom, we figured out that your other zoo is Longleat. How does that sound for today?" He looked at me, then took an earbud out of his ear. "What?" "You don't say what. You say, 'I beg your pardon.'" I repeated myself, and by that time, Ben had joined us. Jamie looked happy, but it was Ben who asked, "Is Mommy coming?" I glanced at Molly and thought, "Why not?" I said, "Yes, Mommy can come if she wants." Molly's face lit up. "I'll just grab my things," she said, and went back inside the house. The boys and I started walking to my car in the parking lot, and we were almost there when Molly caught up with us. Ben, always straightforward, asked, "If Mom's coming, can we ride in her car? It's nicer in the back than yours, Dad." I looked at her and replied, "You'd need to drive. My insurance won't cover your car." "That's okay," she said, and we headed to the garages. As she drove, I began to wonder if I had made the right choice. Would I get through the day without facing the questions and the looks I feared? Luckily, the boys might keep us from having a serious talk. "I had dinner with Piers and Jeanette last night," I said to fill the silence. "Oh yeah? How are they?" "They're doing well and are grandparents now. Esther had her baby." "What was it?" "A little boy named Edward." "Are they happy?" I chuckled. Happy doesn't quite cover it. We chatted cheerfully about the McBains, being grandparents, and even some drinks. Then I remembered, "Jeanette said you should call her. She wants to see you." Molly's expression changed. I could see her stare straight ahead while driving. "It's fine. I've told them almost everything. I kept it decent. They know about Peter and Susan's issues." "What did they say about that?" "Nothing much. Now that you mention it, they didn't really criticize them. But I don't think they liked it." I glanced back to the boys, where I heard strange sounds. Jamie was focused on his iPod, making a consistent pshoosh-pshoosh noise. Ben was using a handheld game with occasional pings and dong-dong-dong sounds. I figured Molly and I could talk without being overheard as long as we avoided any inappropriate words, which boys seemed to catch instantly. I decided to check in about Susan, asking, "How do you feel about her actions?" Molly's expression darkened. "Who? I don't have a mother anymore." I chuckled lightly and she looked at me, serious. "I mean it. I honestly don't want to know her. Even if she apologized, I don't think I could ever forgive her. I've thought a lot about it, and I believe I'd be happier if I never saw or spoke to her again. I don't know how I'll handle it when she returns to Bristol." I thought about telling her that her parents might get divorced, but it wasn't my place. So I just said, "Take it one step at a time." Yes. Maybe Ralph could just come visit me and the boys without her. I understood how deeply she felt about this, and I agreed with her. But it seemed sad and possibly harmful in the long run. It was a 1-hour drive, and as we waited in line at the ticket office, Molly turned to me. "Chris, please forgive me today if I seem a bit quiet. I've gotten used to feeling sad over the last few years because of my guilt about what happened. This will be the first time I'm with you and might feel sad about something related to Peter." I squeezed her knee. "It's okay. Just talk about it, and then we can move on." She smiled softly. "I can't move on until I make things right." Here we go. I thought, this is the start of our day's talk. So feeling a bit nervous, I got out of the car to buy the tickets. When I returned, she seemed happier, and we had a nice time seeing the animals. Jamie even took out his iPod, which was a good sign. There weren't many monkeys or apes climbing on the car, much to the boys' disappointment. However, a lovely lioness walked right in front of us in the lion area, which made the boys smile. After seeing all the animal exhibits, we headed to the car park. I talked to Jamie about how he could leave his iPod in the car while we had lunch and enjoyed the afternoon. I won that discussion, and we set off to find a place to eat. The boys were ahead when Molly said, "I like that you tell Jamie when he needs it. Peter was always afraid to do that. It was up to me to say no. He thought they were my kids and my job. I believe he just didn't want to be the bad guy." I replied, "He's my son, and I care about him. I care about us as a family." "So, what are you thinking about how to bring things back to normal?" I watched the boys and estimated we had about 5 minutes before reaching the restaurant. "Well, I've been considering suggesting we meet regularly, maybe twice a week to talk. Just talk. Well, perhaps we could eat together too. But to discuss what happened, how we felt, what we want, anything really, but more structured, maybe sitting at a table or in comfy chairs." I glanced at her and she was listening closely. "We could use my place. I'm sure Ralph could help with the kids sometimes. And maybe you know someone who could babysit. I would pay." I paused, but she didn't react, so I continued. "It's just an idea. What do you think?" She looked at me. "No counseling?" "No. I thought I had made that clear. I'm not interested in that." "Would you mind if I spoke to a counselor separately? I feel like I have a lot on my mind, and I really want to talk to Heather." "Go ahead. If you think it will help, do it." "Okay. What do you think we would gain from these talks? There's no point in doing something if you don't know what you want from it. Like I said before, we might find a way to forgive each other, be friends, and move on with our lives." She stopped and looked at me. "No." That took me by surprise. I expected her to have ideas about a counselor or changing things up, but just a plain no. "Why not?" "You've been clear about what you want, so I'll be clear too. I'm not willing to go through all this effort and pain for something I don't want. I love you. Always have. I won't start something that doesn't give me a chance to win you back. You might want just friendship, but I want more. I want my husband back." "You have one, though," I said, instantly regretting it. "Sorry. That was not nice. Let's catch up with the boys." Sometimes it feels like nothing goes right. In the restaurant, I was explaining to Ben that he couldn't have a burger again when Molly joined us. She whispered to me, "Let him have it. We're here to have fun, and they're good burgers. I'll have one too." Soon, Jamie chose a burger as well, and we all ended up getting them. They were delicious. At lunch, Ben looked up and asked, "Have you said you're sorry yet, Dad?" I replied, "No, but I am sorry." Molly chimed in, "Sorry for what?" The boys think if I say sorry for what I did that caused the split, you might divorce Peter and let me come back home. Apparently it worked for Dingo Roberts' dad. Molly turned to the boys. It's not your dad who should say sorry. It's me. He didn't do anything wrong. I did. I hope one day he can forgive me. That put me in a tough spot. And I really hope that one day I can forgive your mom. But just because I can forgive her doesn't mean we can all live together forever. But we both love you very much, and we'll make sure you are loved, safe, and see both of us often. Ben looked thoughtful. I don't really remember you being home, Dad, so it's not a big deal. I do remember. It was before your mom married Peter, and it felt better back then. And now your mom is divorcing Peter. Jamie looked at me with a desperate plea in his eyes, but whatever he saw in mine made him stop. Whatever. Oh boy. I felt really down. As soon as we finished our meal, the boys were eager to go play. I suggested to Molly that we find a sunny spot to sit while the boys ran around on the grass for a bit. Once we were settled, I said, I think my suggestion still leaves room for you. In fact, it could give you more chances, but let's add some structure. This is just an idea, but how about we meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays at my place? This way, the weekends are free for me to spend time with the boys, whether that's family time or just us having fun together. We can decide as we go along. And if we want to be a couple, we can still have traditional Friday and Saturday nights. As long as you're not out having fun with no strings attached. Or Myra doesn't need a dinner out. Molly sounded upset. Let's leave Myra out of this. She's just a friend, and I've told you that. If you can't accept it, then why are we even talking? I'm sorry, she quickly replied. And about this whole situation, I'm committed to you and this process for now. I want to exclude others until we feel it's really not working. She frowned. I have a feeling it might often feel hopeless. This won't be easy. No, it won't. But let's promise that no matter how tough things get, we'll keep showing up for each other. Even if you leave in tears or I need to show you out, we'll still come back next Tuesday or Thursday until we both agree it's not working and we need to think about moving on. I paused, waiting for her to respond, but there was silence. Just think about it. And you can also meet this Heather woman if you'd like. I looked at her, and she was just staring back, searching my face. After a moment, I stood up and said, Come on, let's go explore a bit while you think. I suggest we check out the house last as a way to wind down. I hear there's a restaurant down there that serves cream teas. That should be fun for the boys. I glanced around and saw Ben and Jamie moving close to the edge of the lake. Hey, you two, let's find something else to do. Who wants to explore the maze? The boys started coming back toward me while I searched for Molly. She was still sitting on the bench, and I suddenly felt something was off. I hurried back to her. She was there, just as I had left her, but now tears were streaming down her face, and she was shaking from crying hard. Hey, what's wrong? I sat beside her, and she leaned into me as I wrapped my arm around her. The boys walked over and stood quietly, watching their mother. I reached into my pocket and pulled out some coins. Here, go get yourselves an ice cream, I said, handing the money to Jamie. I wrapped my arms around her. Come on, tell me what's bothering you. I just suggested something to help. I thought it was what you wanted. Think it over and see if it works for you. It was just an idea. She continued to cry, and I held her close. After a while, her sobs began to fade. In a soft voice, she said, I saw an ad on TV recently. A woman was in her husband's arms, crying. They were sitting in a place like this. There was a voice saying how hard it was to hear about having cancer and saying goodbye to loved ones. It was asking for help for cancer research. At the end, you realize she's crying happy tears because she's been given good news and is feeling better. That's how I feel. Maybe, just maybe I can get my life back. I think I have a chance. I noticed the boys returning with their ice creams. All right, blow your nose and smile. We're supposed to be having fun. She didn't respond, but then asked urgently, You really meant it, right? That we'll meet twice a week, just us, and talk about anything? And that we can have more family days like today? You meant it, didn't you? Yes, I meant it, I promise. The boys came over and Jamie asked, Are you okay, Mom? She looked at him and replied, Yes, I'm okay. Your dad said he would talk to me and give me a chance to make things right. You'll have to say you're very sorry, Ben suggested. Oh, he knows I've made mistakes. I hurt your dad a lot and he's upset with me. But I promise I'll show him how sorry I am and try to bring him back home. I felt uneasy. Now I might be seen as the bad guy if things didn't turn out perfectly. If she had seen the look in Jamie's eyes during lunch, she might not have said that. It was too hopeful. He doesn't look that angry, Ben argued. No, he doesn't. But I really hurt your dad inside. It will take time for him to believe I am truly sorry and that it's okay for him to come back, but I will do my best. I promise. Please don't push him because it may take a long time to make things right. She turned to me. I promise I will make it safe for him to return home. I have to. I wasn't going to argue in front of the boys. We'll talk and we'll see. The rest of the afternoon, we enjoyed more attractions. For the maze, we split into pairs, Molly with Jamie and Ben with me. Jamie and Molly arrived at the center first and got out of the car quickly. Jamie insisted that he knew the secret to winning, so we decided to play again. This time, it was the boys against the parents. Unfortunately, the boys came out on top. Jamie's reasoning was complicated and seemed more like a fantasy than logic, and it had nothing to do with luck, which was my explanation. Throughout the afternoon, being with Molly felt like spending time with someone very cheerful. She smiled continuously and seemed to only have eyes for me. When we walked together, her hand hung close by, almost as if she wanted to hold it. By the time we entered Longleat House, I felt I had to say something. I feel like a famous person with a big fan. If you keep this up, I might get too shy and run away. I knew I had to be careful not to upset her. She replied with a big smile, I'm just so happy and excited. I want to hug you and celebrate us, but I can't. I just want to toast to our happiness. I'm all for celebrating. But all we've agreed to do is start something that will probably be really tough for us. We have no idea how it will turn out. You shouldn't get your hopes too high about the boys. They might want us to be together again, but I don't think that will happen. She smiled brightly and said, I'm sure it will work out. There was no point in trying to argue, so I didn't. Once we returned to their house, Molly and I were in the kitchen while she prepared something for the boys. We were chatting about our day when someone knocked on the kitchen door. Molly opened it to find Peter standing there. He came in and saw me right away. Oh, it's you, he said, sounding disappointed. An awkward silence filled the room, and Molly broke it first. What do you want, Peter? He looked at her. I was hoping we could talk this evening. He glanced at me. Before it's too late. There's no reason to, she replied. What's he doing here anyway? This is my house too, and I don't want him here. I decided it was time for me to speak up. We just came back from a day out. I should be able to see my sons, even if they live in your and Molly's home. We all went to Longleat. Do you remember that time we went before when you won a ticket in a raffle? She asked. I noticed how she emphasized the word won, and for just a second I thought I saw doubt in his eyes, but he answered, Yes, I remember. It was those good times from our past that I wanted to discuss. I wondered if Molly would call him out on his stories about the Longleat tickets and other things, but she calmly said, I've told you, there's no point. I'm getting the boys something to eat right now. And Chris is here. I told you I would think about giving you some time to talk, but it's not the right moment. How about later this evening? I doubt he'll be here much longer. I might owe you a chance to say what you want, but it won't really help. It's not urgent. Please, Peter, just go. You're my wife. I care about you. I won't be kicked out of my own kitchen like this. I hesitated, but finally said, Molly wants you to leave. It's probably best if you do. You'll have your chance to speak later, but please go for now. I won't take orders from you. I'm her husband. This is my home. He glared at me, his voice rising. I want you to leave, right now. No, I'm worried about Molly's safety with you getting upset. I won't leave until I see you go, and Molly locks the door behind you. I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait to share your thoughts. We stood across the kitchen table for a long moment. Then he sighed and his shoulders slumped. He looked at Molly and said, I would never hurt you. You know that. He then walked out and slammed the door. I turned to Molly, noticing her tension easing. You have to move out. You can't stay here through the whole divorce process. It could take months. She shrugged. I have nowhere to go. I'll ask Carol in the morning. I'm sure we can find a furnished place for a few months, but staying with Ralph is still a good option. I'm not going there. Susan will be back soon. I'm sure of it. She sighed. I guess I'll have to be polite to her, but I really can't live under the same roof. I don't want to be in the same room as her. I can't go there. I thought, I'll have to talk to Ralph and get him to help convince her. How is the divorce going? As of Thursday, he still hadn't replied to my lawyer's letter. She's preparing the papers for me to file for divorce due to unreasonable behavior. We had to be a little creative with that. His demands were a big reason. He'll find out I'm divorcing him for wanting something I would easily give to you. If only he knew. But he must never find out. Does she know when he'll get the papers? Well, she says the courts are moving quickly right now. I'm going in tomorrow afternoon to sign everything. She'll send it off, and I think he'll get his copy by the end of the week. Then you need to be out of here by then. Why? He's right. He would never hurt me. I paused and chose my words carefully. I think he has a bit of the spoiled child in him. I think he could get really upset if someone took his bag of candy away. She smiled and said, Yes, there's a bit of a schoolboy in him. He was a bit restless the other night and might get like that again tonight. She took a breath and sighed. Maybe you're right. I'll think about it. Don't think, just act. She stood and looked at me for a moment. I then said, I should probably go now. He might be watching the time, and I don't want to make things harder for you. Will I see you at my place tomorrow evening? Yes, she said, pausing. Tell me it worries you as much as it worries me. I smiled back. Probably, but tomorrow night should be simple. We just need to talk about the main points, what's on our minds, that sort of thing. I'll come over as soon as the boys are settled, around 8:30 or 9 o'clock. I gave her a light kiss on the cheek and said I would say goodbye to the boys before leaving. As I walked past the gym, I noticed Peter watching me from the shadows inside. I hoped that Molly had locked the door behind me. I drove straight to Ralph's. He let me in and offered me a drink, which I turned down. Once we sat down in his living room, I looked at him and said, I agreed to talk with Molly today. He looked at me, his eyes full of questions. Good, was all he said. I was hoping you could help us a bit. I've suggested that she come to my flat on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so we can talk about everything that's happened, how we feel, what we want. But that means she'll need a babysitter. I'd love to help. I'll talk to her. I paused, then asked, How was Susan? I wish I knew. I got to the pub early yesterday. I got a drink for myself and ordered a cider for her, knowing she would want it. As I told you, I laid out the letters on the table and waited. Very dramatic. She arrived, I stood and greeted her, then we sat down. She saw the letters, realized what they were, and just looked at me, saying, I'm not proud of it, but I had to do it. Any mother would. I pointed out that not every mother would lie and cheat and try to break up their own daughter's marriage. She said Peter had fallen for her and would be a much better husband than you would ever be. She claimed you couldn't be trusted to put Molly and the kids first with your job-focused life. I told her it was Molly's choice, not hers. I picked up the letters, told her I couldn't accept it, and that if she wanted to fix her own marriage, she needed to think about things. And then I left. I didn't even finish my drink. So what are you going to do now? That's what I really wish I knew. I've been thinking about it nonstop. It's not easy to end a 30-year marriage. But I don't know what else to do. But going to see the lawyer feels like a big step. Well, no one is forcing you. There was a long pause. I've been thinking about giving her one more chance to make things better. I thought about booking a simple holiday to Madeira. It's supposed to be beautiful with flowers. Plus, it's an easy flight. There are hotels with good food. Nothing to stress her out. The best outcome would be if she sincerely apologizes and wants to go with me. If not, I will go alone. And if she doesn't apologize when I return, then I'll have my answer. I guess that's true. Do you think Susan will be back here soon? He gave a sad smile. No, if she does, I'll just leave. Why do you ask? Because I need a place for Molly and the boys. I can't trust Peter not to make things hard for her in the coming weeks. I tried to tell her she needs to leave. I think she understands but feels lost about where to go. I've said I'd help find a place, but this seems like the best option. It's not like she's running away. She just needs some space. But she's worried about Susan coming back. I'll visit her tomorrow. I should explain what's going on with Susan and me anyway. Don't worry, Chris. I'll do my best. Thank you, Ralph. This is hard for all of us. It's quite a mess. He chuckled with a hollow sound. You can say that again. I left not long after that. Later, I poured myself a drink and thought about the day. It didn't go as I had hoped, but it ended up in a similar place. I realized I needed to manage my expectations. The next morning at the office, I arrived early. When Carol brought my coffee with the diary under her arm, she asked, "How was your long weekend?" "Good," I replied, smiling. She looked at me closely and then said, "There's something different about you. Something happened, didn't it?" She sat down and waited. I shared everything. Her face went pale and serious when we discussed Susan and the letter. All she said, with clear frustration, was, "That foolish woman." But she didn't say much more. I finished with, "So Tuesday and Thursday evenings are important for the next few weeks." Carol smiled and raised an eyebrow. "And Wednesday and Friday mornings aren't good for early starts and breakfast meetings." "No, those times are perfectly fine for meetings." She looked a bit let down, but just said, "Oh." "How was your weekend?" I asked. Her expression turned sad. Rick was in a bad mood. A customer was upset about how long a job was taking and how much it cost. I think he'd prefer to work on new houses than do plumbing. It doesn't pay as much, but he only has a few years left. He's a bit older than I am, you know. The job is fine as long as the customers are okay, right? She smiled and said, "Something like that." Then she opened her notebook. Later that afternoon, she returned to my office. "Chris, it's 5:30. You need to leave." I appreciated her concern and replied, "No, I don't. She won't be here until at least 8:30. It will only be an hour of serious conversation." Carol looked a little let down, so I suggested, "You could help me out. Can you grab a few pads of paper and some pens or pencils? You can't make it too formal. Next you'll say I have to take notes. I just want to make sure we talk things out. I don't want it to just turn into a quick fix because that won't help us and it will probably be our last meeting." I looked her in the eyes and said, "Trust me." She left and returned with the pads and pencils, placing them in my open briefcase. She faced me and said, "It's up to you, Chris, but if you want my advice, it takes both of you to make it work." I sighed and admitted, "You're right. I'm just really nervous, but for tonight, I want to keep it somewhat formal. I need to write down all the issues so we can be sure to discuss everything." Although I worked until 6:30, I got home with enough time to heat a dinner and take a shower. By 8:30, I was clean and dressed like a modern bachelor, but I felt anxious, waiting for what would happen. I busied myself checking that everything was ready. I set the pads and pencils on opposite sides of the dining table. I kept the wine in the fridge, but laid out glasses and a bottle of water. She showed up just before 9 o'clock, wearing a light summer raincoat and looking nice. As I kissed her cheek, I caught the scent of her familiar perfume. "That's better. You smell just right." She smiled back. "Aeneas, Aeneas, I had to go buy it." Seeing my puzzled look, she explained, "I upset you by wearing the perfume given to me by Peter the other day, so I thought I should get the one you used to buy for me. But I could have sworn you wore that perfume on the first night we met after I returned here. When you came to the old flat to talk about the boys." "I did. But at our lunch that time, I used the very last of the bottle you gave me. I thought to myself, don't worry. If things go well, he'll buy me a new bottle soon." That was before everything changed that day. "Anyway, come in. Let me take your coat. Would you like a glass of white wine?" As I took her coat, I noticed she was wearing a dark blue skirt and a light blue blouse. I recognized the skirt as one she had bought long ago. I always thought she looked good in it, even if it was a bit short, ending a few inches above her knees. She rarely wore it because she said it was too short for a wife and mother. That used to bother me because she had great legs. What frustrated me even more was that it was the same length as when she bought it. If it was too short, why did she buy it? She said she would like a glass of wine, and when I returned from the kitchen with the bottle, I saw her standing by the table which was set for our talk. She turned and looked at me, but I couldn't read her expression. Then she sat in one of the armchairs, turning her back to the table. "I thought it would help if we kept this a bit formal. It might calm things down," I said while pouring the wine. "I'm not here for negotiation. I'm here because you invited me to talk and to build something new." "I'm sorry," I replied, "but I think I might want to take notes." I handed her a glass of wine, picked up a notepad and pencil, and sat in the other armchair. "Before we begin, Chris, I have some news. I signed the divorce papers this afternoon. Now it's in the hands of the courts." "You sound very calm. Wasn't it emotional?" "No, not really. Maybe it should have been, or maybe it will hit me later, but it wasn't." She paused, and it seemed like there were no hidden feelings. Then she continued, "Ralph came to see me today. He told me he's struggling with what Susan did, and he's starting to think about divorce. I don't know how I feel about that. My parents got divorced because of how she acted when we divorced. I have a real issue with her. Part of me wants her to experience something similar. Is that wrong? But I also want Ralph to be happy. I just don't know if he'd be happier getting back together with her or divorcing her. I believe people should stay out of other people's marriages. She should have stayed out of ours, and we should stay out of theirs. Still, I wouldn't mind if I don't have to see her much in the future. That's how I feel too, but he's my dad, and he's just trying to do his best." Tears started to form in her eyes. "Come on, have some wine and dry your eyes. There's nothing you can do about Ralph and Susan. It's a real mess, but right now we need to focus on our future, which is much more important." She wiped her eyes and smiled. "But there's a bright side. Ralph says he won't let her come back until he decides what to do, so I can move out and stay there for now." I smiled and felt relieved. "That's great news. When?" "Soon. Possibly tomorrow." "Do you need any help? I can try to take time off." "No. Ralph and I can handle it with a few trips in our cars. I want to take everything important to me. The rest he can keep or sell based on the arrangement." That made me wonder about the arrangement and if he would pay for his part in everything. But tonight didn't seem like the right time to show my anger. Instead, I asked, "Have you thought about what you want to discuss in these meetings?" She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. I looked at her face and realized she knew the effect it had on me. She looked at me and said, "I'm fine with you leading. We can do whatever you want." She crossed her legs the other way. "All right." I smiled. "First, could you please dress a bit more modestly for these sessions?" She looked surprised. "But I thought you liked how I dressed. You always said you liked me in this skirt and that I had nice legs." "Without a bra? You usually did that when you wanted something or if I convinced you." Now she looked defeated. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I hoped if only we could, then everything would start to come back together for us." "Do you think our relationship was just about that? You know that's not true." "Sure, that was a big part of it, and I guess it led to some issues, but just rushing into things won't fix anything." I paused and smiled. "Though I can't deny it sounds nice, I can't think of a better way to spend the evening." She looked a bit ashamed. "You're right. I know you're right." She paused for a moment, thinking. "But I still want to wear nice clothes. I'm meeting the man I care about. I want to feel good as I face my emotions and my past mistakes." "Okay, I can't stop you from wanting to look nice. But I wish you wouldn't say you love me." She looked hurt by that, but I continued, "I just don't see how, after everything. But if that's how you feel, you should express it. That's what these meetings are for. But it doesn't make any sense to me." We both took a moment to sip our wine, and I poured more into our glasses. After sitting down, I asked, "So what do you want to talk about?" She seemed surprised. "I thought this was your chance to share whatever is on your mind. I don't feel like I have any problems. I have made some huge mistakes, and I'm confused about how I acted, but that's what I will be discussing with Heather. This time is for you. So you don't want to know about Helene, or what my relationship with Myra was like, or why I didn't come to find you when we parted ways, or what I did before meeting Helene, or even where my travels took me?" "Oh, yes, I've wondered about that, but I thought I shouldn't ask." "No. The reason we are meeting is so you can ask anything you want, though you might not like some of the answers." Well, I want to know about everything you mentioned, except why you never came to me. That one bothered me a lot 2 years in. I was really angry for a while, but then I realized I never gave you a reason to reach out. I didn't mean to make you think I was in love with Peter, but I know I might have given that impression. I'm sorry. I was taking notes. Anything else on your mind? I guess I need to think about it. I noticed she looked tense, and I felt tense too. We should find a way to make these evenings a bit easier. Could you arrive earlier next time? Well, if we're staying at Ralph's place, I know he would be happy to take care of the boys, so I can come by any time. I got up and took a key from the drawer of a desk in the room. Here's a key to this place. You can come in whenever you want. We could have dinner here before we talk. That would help, and sharing a meal is important. She smiled. I'd like that, but you still haven't told me what your questions are. You might as well write them down, too. For a while, we worked on my list of thoughts. She was very helpful and didn't say no to anything. At one point, we talked about Susan and her behavior. Molly mentioned that there were times when Susan had persuaded her not to come see me, but only twice did she actually stop her. I asked, "Why? Why did you let her do that?" She shrugged. "I don't know. She thought it was for the best. That you needed to decide for yourself. I guess I believed her too. It doesn't make sense to me either." I shook my head, unable to understand. "Is that what you call it when someone does that to their mother-in-law?" She smiled and said, "Well, I suppose that's it for tonight, unless—" And she shifted in her seat again. But this time, she was smiling, and I knew she was just joking. I grinned back and asked, "How did you leave the house without wearing a bra? Ralph would have noticed, and you wouldn't have wanted that." "I took it off in the car." She looked at me, then added, "Do you remember when I told you everything, and you said you couldn't be with me because you were scared of your feelings?" "Yes, I remember." Well, it got me thinking. When I married Peter after about 6 months, I figured out that things weren't right between us. I went through a phase of reading stories for women. She chuckled lightly. Nothing too wild. Just normal books from the store, mostly respectable. And I would spend some afternoons reading while trying to find some enjoyment on my own. It was the only way I felt fulfilled. Those daydreams started making me think about you, which kept me going for a long time. Anyway, one of those stories had some themes I didn't really like. It was about a young woman, maybe in her 20s, who was involved with an older man into things I found uncomfortable. He used to hurt her, but she seemed to accept it. It was all about dealing with feelings she felt guilty about. I'm not into that kind of thing. I thought about it a bit before, when I was mad about you and everyone else, but it's not really me. No? That's good to hear, but I've realized that I wouldn't mind finding some way to move past my feelings. Maybe that's why I want to be close to you again, to feel connected and to understand that I'm yours again. Do you get that? Letting some of those feelings out wouldn't be such a bad thing. I could respond lightly or seriously. I chose to be serious. Well, I guess we'll see what happens if anything does. But promise me, don't build up too many hopes. I don't like that pressure. And you should lower the expectations for the guys, too. If it doesn't happen, I don't want to be the bad guy. I'm sorry, I know I went overboard yesterday. I've tried to pull back. I'll have another chat with them. Make sure you do. I stood up. The evening had come to an end. After a somewhat tense goodbye, with lots left unspoken, I poured myself a whiskey and reflected on the night. I decided that it went as well as I could have hoped. The next day, Wednesday, Carol greeted me with a curious look. I smiled and replied, "As well as I could expect." "Pretty good, I guess." "We talked, and that's a good step." She smiled. "Keep it up. I'll get you a coffee. Today is going to be busy, so you won't have time to think too much about it." During a meeting after lunch, Myra came in and looked right at me. "So, what's your news?" I smiled back at her straightforwardness. "We're talking." "Good," she replied simply. Later that evening, I called Molly to check if she had moved to Ralph's place. She had. It was harder than she thought, and she mentioned it felt a bit emotional. Suddenly, everything she had mentioned was becoming real. She was leaving the past 4 years behind. I realized anyone would feel a mix of emotions about ending a marriage, no matter how difficult it had been. I understood that. She had left Peter a note saying she moved out and wouldn't be coming back, inviting him to move back into their home. I considered warning Piers that Peter might be in a strange mood the next morning. Then I called my mom. She and Len were enjoying their time in Scotland. They planned to visit John O'Groats just to say they reached the top of the mainland. They were still thinking about taking a ferry to the Orkney and Shetland Isles. But when I told them that Molly and I were communicating, I sensed their plans for exploring Scotland became less important. I had a feeling I would see them back in Bristol soon, even though I stressed that we were just talking, and it would take a while before we knew what would happen. On Thursday, I received 2 phone calls. The first was from Molly, who sounded a bit tense. She just wanted to confirm I would prepare dinner for us that night. The second call was from Ralph. He didn't want to interfere, but felt he should tell me that Molly was feeling emotional about leaving her home and filing for divorce. As Ralph said, she stepped into an uncertain future, so it's natural for her to look back and have some doubts. I had planned to focus our dinner conversation on Susan and Peter's actions. I needed to be sure that Molly was drawn into that marriage at a time when she was vulnerable and open to influence. However, after talking to Ralph, I decided to gently show Molly that Peter Davies had behaved poorly by pursuing a married woman. I thought it might help her feel better about leaving him if she realized what kind of person he was. I had to admit, I would enjoy proving my thoughts about him. On my way home, I stopped by the supermarket to buy dinner. I wanted something nice but not too fancy. I wanted to have dinner, not to make a big deal out of my feelings. So, I ended up choosing some cooked chicken, a mix of salads, and a slice of cheesecake, all with a nice bottle of wine. Molly arrived shortly after I got home. She looked nice, but this time her outfit wasn't too revealing. However, her perfume was noticeable, and it caught my attention. We shared a glass of wine before sitting down to eat. I could see Ralph was right. She looked stressed. "You look tired. Has it been tough?" I asked. "Yeah, it hasn't been easy. The phone calls from Peter started right after he got home last night and realized I was gone. At first he was confused about why I left. Then he got angry, saying things that hurt. Finally, late last night, he was begging and crying. That sounds about right. Does he know where you are?" "Yes, I told him because I wanted him to understand that I was leaving him, not running to someone else. But I feel so guilty. All the pain he feels is because of me. I should never have married him. I led him to this." "Well, if it makes you feel any better, as far as I know, he's been working as usual." "Yes, he said he would go to work today, but he's upset and thinks you had a part in him getting a formal warning. He believes it was unfair since he thinks his absence was reasonable." "No, we aren't responsible for his actions. He's an adult. He started this situation years ago when he chose to be with someone married, and continued to do that with your mother as well." She looked at me, a bit sharply, and said, "It wasn't like that. He was just a friend, and you can't really blame him for getting advice from Susan." I decided to change the subject and keep things light. I shared a bit about my job and how well I got along with Carol. We talked about when I might see the boys this weekend, and she suggested I come to Ralph's for Sunday lunch, which would help provide some stability for the boys in their new home. We then discussed the boys and revisited the idea of possibly enrolling them in private school once things settle down. That led to an interesting moment when she said, "Well, they have a trust fund, so it wouldn't be too expensive." I was surprised. "What trust fund?" She looked at me in disbelief. "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you knew. I put all the money from our divorce into a trust fund for the boys. It didn't seem right to use your money for my marriage with Peter. Since then, I've made some changes to the money situation. You paid too much in upkeep, so I took what I thought was extra money after their real costs. I saved it in a deposit account and added it to their trust fund once a year." She paused and looked at me across the dinner table. "I shouldn't have taken your money for myself and Peter." I was quiet for a bit, just sipping my wine. I wasn't really shocked. Molly always acted with honesty. Then I asked, "What will happen with the money in the divorce?" She looked up at me. "I started with nothing. I shouldn't have married him, so I'll leave with nothing." "No, that's not right. You gave him 4 years of your life. Maybe not love, but you were there for him. You shared your life together. That's what he wanted, and he promised to give you what you deserved. You should get half of what you built together over the years. He shouldn't be hurt financially because I want a divorce. Besides, a lot of his money comes from his mom. She left him a lot when she passed away. She seemed a bit defensive, so I asked, what was his mom like? She paused, perhaps surprised by my question, but then smiled a little. She was wonderful. She was proud of Peter and happy he found someone to settle down with. She liked me and I liked her. Why do you ask? No special reason. One of the boys mentioned her, so I was curious. When did she pass away? About 2 years ago. That's when we bought the better house. She also left us a cottage in Wales. Where is it in Wales? I assume it's close since Peter goes there often. No, it's in the Black Mountains, at the foot of them, really. Just north of Abergavenny, in a roundabout way to Hay and Wye. Sounds beautiful. When did she write her will? She looked surprised. About 6 months before she passed away. She had to make changes because her sister died around the same time. If I were your lawyer, I would say she knew what she was doing when she left the money to Peter. She wanted you to benefit from it too. You deserve your share. No, Peter has been through enough. It wouldn't be fair to take his mother's money away from him. What have you asked for in the divorce? She hesitated for a moment, looking carefully at her salad as she answered, I haven't. My lawyer said we could discuss money later. It was more important to get the divorce moving first. Your lawyer knows you don't want to ask for anything, and she disagrees with you. Right? Molly became tense. We talked about it, and we decided to handle it later. I felt frustrated. I liked the idea of hurting Peter financially, but I didn't like that Molly either thought too little of her role in their marriage or cared too much for him to let it go. Either way, it bothered me. So we ate our salads in silence until I served the cheesecake. I tried to persuade her again. I'm sorry, but we need to talk about this. Molly, please have some respect for yourself. You gave a lot to that marriage, and you deserve to take something back. Please. This isn't your business. You're the one who said the divorce is needed between me and Peter, that it's not about us. That's true. But you took half of our money when we divorced. You took that from me even though I did nothing wrong, as you said yourself. Now you won't take anything from Peter. You care for him more than you cared for me. How do you think that makes me feel? I took that money and gave it to your sons. I didn't keep it for myself. We finished our cheesecake in silence. Afterward, I cleared the plates and asked, Would you like a coffee? She looked even more exhausted than when she got here. I realized she hadn't expected an argument. No, I know we need to talk, but could I just go home? I don't want to relive the past 4 years right now, and I definitely don't want to argue. I said goodbye with a kiss and walked her to the door before pouring myself a large glass of whiskey. I felt downcast. Luckily, the Friday after my short meeting with Molly turned out to be very busy. I threw myself into my work, trying to keep myself occupied. I noticed Carol seemed to sense my mood. She didn't mention her usual topics. Instead, she just looked after me all day, making sure I got to every meeting on time, returned important calls, and had a proper lunch. One meeting in the afternoon included Piers. When he came into the room, he looked at me and said, Chris, do you have a minute? I figured this would be about Peter, and I was interested. My office was too crowded, but we found some privacy in an empty boardroom. Piers started as soon as he closed the door. Peter came to see me this morning. I didn't realize Molly had moved out. He got a set of divorce papers in this morning's mail. How did he react? He is very unhappy. Right now he feels the world is against him, and it's all your fault. I smiled. That's not surprising. Why can't he see that this is the result of his actions? He shouldn't have tried to pursue a married woman or gotten involved with her mother's help. It was bound to end in sadness, and here we are. Does he see it differently? Has she moved in with you? I replied, no. I paused. But we are communicating. We agreed to talk things over and then check in on how we feel on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And how's that going? Not great. We met twice. Tuesday was okay, but last night we had a disagreement and she left early. It wasn't dramatic, just different views. Do you want to discuss it? I sighed. Not right now. Let's see how the weekend goes. And honestly, if I'm going to be upset, I need something to help me feel better. He smiled and I asked, "What about Peter?" He shook his head. "I'm not sure. I told him to take a day off and see a lawyer. I also suggested he go to his cottage in Wales for the weekend, where he can think things over. But I don't know if he will. He was still at his office when I left." Well, it's his life to manage. I opened the door and started to walk back to my office with Piers beside me. I just hope he doesn't cause trouble for me, Molly, or the kids. I kept working. Carol went home after looking at me carefully, and then Myra entered my office holding a file. "Carol mentioned you wanted the best outlook for next quarter's figures." I paused for a moment. If I wanted them, I would have asked Trevor Gale. "Oh," she said, sitting in a chair at my desk and looking at me. "And did Carol say I needed a friend?" She smiled. "You notice everything, don't you? How about a quick drink? It is Friday night." "I have work to finish. Help yourself to some whiskey." I nodded toward the decanter. "Not for me, thank you." "Come on, Chris. If you have more to do, take some things home for the weekend and get me a gin and tonic." "I could use one." "Why?" "Because I have a stressed boss who's turning into a workaholic, and it concerns me. I need to talk about it." I laughed and gave in. We went to the pub, but not for long since Myra mentioned Dr. Will was coming to Bath for the weekend, which dashed my hopes of inviting her to dinner. We barely discussed Molly. I just said last night was a letdown, and she told me to be patient. Other than that, it was all about Will. I was glad to see her so happy, but it worried me a bit. I reminded her of something she said about Molly and me. "Remember, Myra, it's early days." On Sunday, I arrived at Ralph's house early. I had just greeted everyone when Ben pulled me aside to show me his new bedroom. He was sharing it with Jamie, which seemed to be their choice, especially since there was another bedroom available. The two brothers seemed to be spending time together during a difficult period. When I came downstairs again, Ralph glanced at his watch and said, "We have plenty of time before lunch. How about a fourth round?" "To the pub? No, I'm here to see the boys." I noticed his disappointment, so I added, "Unless we take Jamie and Ben with us." His expression brightened. "Sure." I walked into the kitchen where Molly was busy making pastry. "Ralph suggested we all go to the pub. Is that okay with you?" She looked relieved. "Sure. Just be quick and back by 1:30. I kissed her on the cheek. "Are you all right?" "Yes." Her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just feeling a bit overwhelmed with all the cooking right now." "Just relax. It won't matter if things are a little late or if a veggie is overcooked." I left her in the kitchen. Ralph and I took the boys and headed to the pub. We found a table in the garden while I went to get drinks. The boys joined us for a bit, sipping their drinks and munching on snacks, but soon they spotted some friendly dogs and dashed off, leaving Ralph and me alone. As we watched them leave, Ralph said, "Good. I wanted to talk to you." "About what?" "I don't mean to pry, but what happened Thursday evening? It seemed like she came home earlier than expected and was in a bad mood. She was very quiet and she won't tell me what's wrong." I thought for a moment. "I'm sorry, Ralph, but if she won't talk, I can't either." He gave me a quick look. "Fair enough. I should stay out of it." He smiled again. "But if it's about him, that's sensitive right now. Poor Peter, he's hurting and she feels sorry for him. But that was just a silly mistake. Well, his and my wife's." "And how is your wife?" I asked, glad to shift the subject. Ralph took a long sip of his beer, thinking, "I know what I'm going to do. Molly doesn't know this yet, but I've made a decision." "Well, you don't have to share if you don't want to." "Are you still seeing her?" "Not since that letter issue. She's called a few times, confused about the problem. I feel like if she can't see there's a problem, then that is the problem." He paused and looked at me. "She makes me so angry. She even said that since you and Molly know the truth and can discuss it, everything is fine. It's frustrating. I think she's just trying to defend herself. Anything to cover up the problems." He sighed. "Well, that won't work." He finished his drink and looked at me. "Want another?" "I do, but the boys probably want their lunch. Why does everything feel so heavy with feelings these days?" Back home, Molly made a delicious roast pork. The last time we had roast pork together was the Sunday before we separated years ago, shortly after she had been with Peter Davies. I decided to be direct for once. Do you remember the last time we had roast pork? Molly glanced at me across the table. Yes. It was the first Sunday of the hardest years of my life. I hope this is the first Sunday of the best years ahead. I appreciated her honesty. It reminded me of something she had said before about maybe getting her life back. For a moment, I wondered if she might succeed, but that felt silly. There had been so much pain, and everything had changed. Once we finished eating, the boys jumped up and left. Ralph told us to stay put while he got us coffee. He wanted to talk with us both. As I sat at the table, I looked at Molly. She had seemed happier during lunch, but now a cloud of worry hung over us again. Come on, Molly. Something is clearly bothering you. What is it? Molly gazed into my eyes. You won't be upset? I'm not sure. Just tell me, and I'll let you know. The solicitor called on Friday. She said Peter would have received the papers on Friday or Saturday, and I haven't heard anything. I'm worried about him and thought he might react strongly. Well, Piers told me he got the papers on Friday morning, too. He was upset, but doing okay. Piers advised him to see a solicitor and perhaps visit Wales, as he goes there sometimes when things get tough. So maybe he did. And no, I'm not upset. I tried to reassure her. I thought to myself, I'm not really happy that you're worrying about him, but I understand, so I won't be angry. Just then, Ralph came back with a tray of coffee. After serving us, he looked at me and Molly. I want to discuss Susan. I took a sip of coffee and listened. Ralph seemed to be speaking more to Molly, and I guess I was just there for support in case she needed it. We've met several times in the 5 weeks I've kept her from coming home, and I've talked to her on the phone many times as well. She shows no signs of understanding that what she did was wrong. Her sense of right and wrong is really off to me. Plus, she acts like I'm just a child having a tantrum over a broken toy, thinking I'll calm down and accept things soon. She is growing impatient. All she wants is to return here and move on with her life. Daddy. This was the first time I heard Molly call Ralph Daddy in years. Please don't do anything drastic for my sake. I dislike her right now, but Ralph squeezed her hand gently. I won't, Molly, I promise. They gazed into each other's eyes. I felt like I wasn't even in the room at that moment. That's why I asked, So what are you planning to do, Ralph? I've planned a short trip for 11 days to Madeira. We leave on Thursday next week. I checked, and there are at least 8 spots available. I'm going to pack all of Susan's things from this house, her clothes, her photos, everything that belongs to her. I might need your help with some of it, Molly. I will visit her the Wednesday before my trip. I'll return her things and explain what I'm doing. It's up to her to decide. I'll ask her to apologize for what she did to both of you and for all the lies she told me. If she agrees, then I'll invite her to come on the vacation and to try to fix our marriage. If she doesn't do those things, then I guess we'll be on our way to divorce once I return. Molly looked anxious. What do you think she'll choose? I expect she will argue and complain. I think she'll let me go alone and claim she did nothing wrong. She doesn't see why she should go on a trip she doesn't want to attend just to apologize for something she believes she hasn't done. Now Molly seemed really nervous. What if she comes here while you're away? What should I say or do? Ralph paused for a moment. I'll tell her not to come. I'll change the lock on the front door and keep the back door secured. That way she won't be able to get in. But I'll let her know I'm doing it. I'm not sure if it's entirely legal, but she'd need a court order to enter, and I can't imagine she would do that. Plus, Chris will ensure that you're safe. He looked at me. Right, Chris? Of course. She's been in Weymouth for nearly 5 weeks. A week or 2 more won't hurt her. Molly still didn't look convinced. I'm just afraid she might cause problems for me and the boys. Ralph reassured her once more. She won't. You're her daughter. If anything, she might want to fix things with you. Molly managed a grim smile. Well, she won't get that chance. She should be worried about what might happen if I see her. Ralph smiled, and I felt more relaxed. That's the spirit. I know it can't be easy for you, dealing with your parents splitting up just as you're facing this divorce. But this time, we both realize that what we are doing feels right. I interrupted. I hope you know what you're doing, Ralph. I understand your feelings, but I warn you, being divorced can be a lonely experience. Trust me, I know. Molly looked up and said, Being in a bad marriage can also be a lonely place. I glanced at my watch. I have to go. I'm flying to Stockholm tonight. I noticed a worried look from Molly. It's okay. I'll be back by lunchtime on Tuesday. It's just an important meeting, and I'm doing my part to make it work. I'll go say goodbye to the boys. After a few more reassuring looks, hugs, and kind words, I drove away. I returned to my office just before lunch on Tuesday. Carol had planned a working lunch for the two of us to catch up on my time away and look ahead at my schedule. But before I even reached my office, she said, "Can you call Ralph Tremaine? He needs to speak with you quickly." When I called Ralph, he informed me that on Monday evening, Peter had shown up, insisting to talk to Molly. After some hesitation, Molly had agreed to let him speak. It didn't go well. Peter wanted to try again, but spent most of the time blaming others for their issues, especially me. After about 30 minutes, Molly told him that she had listened, but it didn't change anything, and would he please leave? Things got a bit heated, and Ralph ended up threatening to call for help, but Peter left eventually. Molly was very upset for the rest of the evening and still seemed quiet at breakfast. Ralph knew she was coming to see me as planned later that evening, but he warned me to not expect too much. I promised to be gentle with her and to share some honest thoughts on Peter's true character. Ralph's only advice was, make sure you can support everything you say and take it very gently. I agreed to follow his advice. I brought home a ready-to-cook Chinese meal for two and waited for Molly. When she arrived, she looked wonderful but seemed tired and anxious. She told me about Peter's visit on Monday, and it matched what Ralph had described. It was clear that she found the meeting very distressing. It took the entire meal for me to help her relax and even smile a little. I was growing tired of feeling like I needed to take care of her because of Peter's behavior. After we finished our meal, we took our coffee and settled down. Molly asked, "So what do you want to talk about?" I replied, "I think the best place to start is when you first met Peter. Let's go through the story again, step by step." She agreed, and that's what we did. I asked Molly a lot of questions about her conversations with Peter, whether they were alone or with others around. Even though I pressed her for answers and sometimes she looked at me with doubt, she never admitted anything was wrong with their friendship or that Peter was suggesting she should cheat. Then came the day of the lunch. I started asking her more specific questions. How did she really feel? How quickly did Peter invite her to lunch? Who decided to ride together? When she asked for a gin and tonic and he ordered it, was it just a standard one or a large one? She did tell me that it was likely a large one, but it could have been even bigger. Was there a real difference? Maybe. To some bartenders, a gin and tonic is a single, a large is a double, and a very large is a triple. After that, I asked if their talk at the restaurant had any romantic hints. She said yes, but only in a lighthearted way between coworkers. Nothing serious or too direct. When I brought up the grappa, I asked if Peter had actually come to like it. Suddenly, Molly seemed upset. "Yes! Now he really enjoys it. He calls it our drink." But that's the issue, isn't it, Chris? You're trying to show that he was wrong for me. He's not a bad guy, and he wasn't trying to lead me on. He's a good, honest man who felt something that day, just like I did. And later, he developed real feelings. Stop trying to make him seem terrible. Honest? How honest was he about his tickets to Longleat? Was it honest when he pretended sweet peas were his favorite flower, or that he happened to have veal on your first date? How honest is he, Molly? He doesn't sound honest to me. She stood up and headed for the door, grabbing her jacket and bag as she went. He's a good man. You can't blame him for taking advice from Susan. She shouldn't have set him up. It was my choice that first time. I liked him. I've already said that. I made a mistake. I was wrong, but it wasn't his fault. Stop trying to make him responsible for everything. By then, she was at the front door, ready to leave. "John 11:35, I muttered as she walked out. That night, the whiskey was very comforting. On Wednesday night, Ralph called just after I returned to my hotel room in Oxford after a business dinner. "Hello, Ralph." "Chris, do you have a moment to chat?" "Yes, of course." "Well, I did warn you to be careful, but you didn't take my advice." "I did. I understand that she feels sensitive about Peter. But there are times when things are really sensitive, and it can't be easy for you to feel that way about another man." "No, it isn't, but I understand why she feels that way. I'll manage. How is she?" She seems a little guilty, I think. She wouldn't share what you said, just that you confronted Peter unfairly, but I think she feels somewhat sorry now. One day, Ralph, I'll show you that I wasn't unfair at all. Is she coming back for more tomorrow? Yes, I thought you two decided to keep talking. Let her bring the food this time. It might make her feel better. But ease off on Peter. Okay. I have some things to say to her about him, but maybe this isn't the right time. Glad to hear that. Trust me, you'll get there. I laughed. Can you tell me where there is? Now he laughed too. That would take away all the fun and mystery. So on Thursday, I found Molly in my kitchen when I got home. She was filling a pot with water at the sink when I walked in, and I could tell something was wrong. Hi, what's wrong? She turned to me, and it was clear she had been crying. I saw Jeanette this afternoon. And? Was it tough? She talked about forgiveness when I met her. Oh, she was really nice to me, very nice actually. No, it was the stories she shared. You know what they were. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think? I smiled. If I remember right, I tried to bring it up on Tuesday. It didn't go over well. I assume her stories had to do with Peter and his interest in Grappa, and his intention to pursue me, as he put it, and that's why Peter and Piers weren't getting along. He even had to lie to me about it. What are we having for dinner? Does it go with red or white? I'm fine either way, but it's just pasta with marinara sauce. I guess white, but I might prefer something stronger. How about a gin and tonic? I was thinking about that. It was definitely a large one, and I'm sure it was quite strong. A triple. He wanted you to relax. I poured 2 gin and tonics and handed her one. It's a modest one, I promise. Don't. I feel so foolish. I messed up my life and hours for someone who only wanted to pursue me. Drink your drink, and we can talk more about it later. Was Jeanette still proud of being a grandmother? We really didn't discuss anything personal until after dinner, except for a brief chat about Ralph and Susan and that Molly's childhood home might be sold, but that didn't seem to bother her. It was after we settled with mugs of coffee and what was left of our wine that she said, "Okay, tell me what I missed. How did I fall for this charming guy?" I smiled. Can I be a bit clearer in my questions than I was on Tuesday? Yes. There's no point in being subtle. Okay, let's say that Peter noticed you as someone he liked. Maybe he realized it even before he introduced himself, but I think it was at lunch that day in the canteen when he saw you eating alone. My guess is that you made it clear that you were married, had 2 young kids, and loved your family. Now, we don't know if he was looking specifically for someone who was married or if he just went after anyone he found interesting, but either way, I think he had his eyes on you. Maybe there were a couple of others he was interested in too, since he had quite a reputation. So, he made sure we became friends. That's what I would do if I was determined. He probably knew that you weren't paying attention to any hints he dropped before, so he knew he had to try harder. I imagine he would try to make you think a bit differently about your relationship with me. Did he? She thought for a moment. I don't think so. Well, maybe a little. When I told him about how I felt, about not being able to support you in your career, he mentioned that in his experience, the wives of ambitious men often lead their own lives. They have different friends, interests, and connections. That makes sense. He might have been suggesting it's okay for you to have your own friendships. She didn't seem very happy about that, but admitted, "Yeah, he did talk about me building my own life a lot." I continued, "I think he also tried to stir up some feelings in you, making you think about him in a different way whenever you met, just to make sure you had some kind of awareness about him." She thought for a while. Maybe. I did notice that he was very attractive. I wondered why he spent time with me when there were so many other admirers. It made me think we were becoming good friends. Then we get to that day. I bet even casual hospital talk had some undertones, even if you didn't see it directly. Actually, some conversations were about his last girlfriend. It wasn't about me and him, but about some girl they had a physical relationship with, but not much else. It sounded kind of sad. I felt a little sorry for him. I smiled. Ah, he's managing to remind you of how appealing he is and how wonderful he is in relationships while also winning your sympathy, all in a friendly way. I noticed she was looking quite uneasy, but I continued. He was taking advantage of the situation and he saw his chance. We figured out that he got you to drink quite a bit, which gave him a way to invite you back to his place. And then we come to that final moment when he got you to his home. Please remember that he spilled hot water on himself, not hot coffee, which would have stained his shirt. I doubt it was too hot. I couldn't say for sure. It was wet and warm by the time I arrived. But he had to take off his shirt and pants. This is a man who was very proud of his body. He knew what he was doing. He wanted to look good to you. When he came into the sitting room after spilling, was he wearing socks? She seemed surprised by my question. No. Men can look strange walking around in shorts with socks. So, instead of putting on a clean shirt and pants after the spill, he took off his socks. I suppose so. I remember you said he came up behind you in his boxers. They were nice, right? Yes, they were fine. They were black silk. He really did look quite good in them. Did he always wear black silk boxers every day? You would know since you were married. No, he usually wore good quality cotton ones, but that day he happened to wear stylish black silk ones. What a coincidence. Molly finished her glass of wine and looked at me. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and I mean that literally. I still picture those black boxers in my mind. They were fresh, like they just came out of the package. Why didn't I notice then? She paused, looking at me. When we got to his place, he went into his bedroom for a moment. I didn't think much of it, but he had time to change into a fresh pair and put on some cologne? Probably. He did smell nice. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at me. But I was drawn to him. I wanted it at that moment. I met her gaze. Yes, you did. You shouldn't have. You betrayed our marriage. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I went on. He was clever. In a way, I have to respect him. He saw an opening and took it. He was completely successful from his point of view. But you fell for it, and you shouldn't have. Still, I must admit, it's more on him than on you. You were taken advantage of. But I got caught. Why didn't I see it coming? Shouldn't I be good at noticing those things? It took you and Jeanette for me to realize it. Why do you make it sound so clear? Like I said, he was skilled, and he managed to avoid your attention. I see it now because it's what I would have done if I were in his position, given his goals. We sat quietly for a while until Molly finally said, I think I'd like to go home now. And I think you should. You've had quite a day. But don't be hard on yourself. That was a long time ago. I guess with Susan pushing you and him together, you didn't want to doubt him until now. At the door, I kissed her on the cheek and said, Cheer up. Now you know the truth, and you can handle it. After she left, I felt strange. I was glad she finally saw the truth, but I also felt anger and sadness. For the past few weeks, every conversation we had was about Peter. It was all about him. I called her on Friday to check in. I'm thinking a lot, and I'm getting angry, she said. That was good, I thought, but I was just focused on planning a bike ride with the boys for Sunday. After we returned late that Sunday afternoon, Molly looked at me and asked, Do you have a minute? Sure, I replied, following her into the kitchen. Through the window, I could see Ralph working in his garden. She turned to me, holding a letter in an open envelope. This was on the mat this morning, and there's no delivery on Sundays. I took the letter. It was about 5 pages long, written by hand and addressed to her from Peter. He dropped it off himself? We think so, either late last night or early this morning. Please read it. I won't hide anything from you. I read it. He mostly pleaded that they should try again, expressing how much he loved her and that only he could make her happy. He spent a lot of time saying she was fooling herself if she thought I would take her back. He even called me selfish and ambitious, stating that even if I did take her back, I would only make her unhappy. The worst part was that he claimed he would never agree to a divorce. I looked at Molly and asked, What will you do now? I've already decided to see my lawyer again as soon as I can. I'll give the letter to her for a response. Maybe an official reply will make him realize he needs to let the divorce happen. That sounds good. What other reasons did you want to see her? You were right. I was led into ruining our marriage, and I was tricked into marrying him. I should get my fair share. I want the full 50% and anything else I'm due. How do you think he will react? What if he doesn't respond at all? There are rules about that. I don't quite remember the details, but you have to show that he was given a fair chance to reply. If he doesn't, then the divorce can continue. It just takes more time and costs more money. And how do you think he'll respond to your financial claim? I believe he'll be upset. When I first married him, he often thought about how he couldn't provide a nice home like I was used to. He was proud that his mother had left him money for better things. He won't like the idea of losing it. But if I have the law on my side, there won't be much he can do about it. That sounded fair enough to me. I tried to express concern, so I asked, "Are you going to be okay?" "Yes. Ralph wants to go with me to see the lawyer. He wants to talk about ending things with Susan." "How do you feel about that? It can't be easy." "I'm torn. I don't like the idea that my parents are getting divorced after 36 years. But at the same time, I'm relieved that I won't have to deal with Susan anymore. What she did was inexcusable, and I don't want to forgive her." I understood her feelings about Susan, but it made me sad to think anyone would turn their back on their mother so completely. I also had concerns about Ralph's decision. After 36 years, couldn't they find a way to work things out instead of heading down the lonely path of divorce? But it was their choice to make. I was deep in thought when I heard Molly's voice again. "And Chris, I want to say something else." I looked up and waited for her. She stepped closer to me. "I want to apologize." She took a breath. "I hope you know how truly sorry I am for getting caught up in my marriage to Peter. It was a mistake from the start. He shouldn't be the focus of my life. You should—" She leaned in to kiss me but paused, sadness in her eyes. Instead, she kissed my cheek. That evening, I went home feeling confused. I was glad to be important to her, but it bothered me that she still thought about him. I was happy she saw Susan for who she really was, but I felt it was sad for anyone to hate their mother. I was relieved she recognized Peter for what he was, but it hurt knowing she had married him. It felt like every thought had a downside. Partly because I felt obligated, and partly because I needed to talk. I called my mom. She and Len had returned to Newcastle and were staying with Brian and Morag. After the usual chat about their trip to Scotland and how everyone was, she sensed something in my voice. She interrupted what I was saying. "Chris, it sounds like something is bothering you. Would you like me, Len or Brian, to call you back for a real conversation?" "How about you?" I replied. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. About 90 minutes after that, I hung up after a long talk with my mom. I didn't have all the answers, but I felt a lot better. Mom had only asked questions and listened, but somehow it made things better. I was just pouring my second whiskey when my phone rang again. It was Mum. She had spoken to Len, and they planned to return to Bristol on Tuesday. They decided to stay at a hotel this time and invited Molly and me to dinner at Les Jardins that evening. I accepted for myself, but told Mum that only Molly could decide for herself. I promised to talk to her. On Monday morning, I realized I was not in a good mood. After my second cup of coffee, Carol sat down and looked at me. "Can I guess that life is a bit tough right now? Another tough part of the story?" I updated her on everything, but also shared how confused I felt. She looked at me and said, "When you started this twice-a-week talking plan, you knew it would be a long and challenging journey. There will be times when you feel love, times when you feel anger, but most of the time you might feel unsure. When you finally know how you feel, you'll be at the end of this journey, whatever that may be." I'm not sure that's the right way to see things. Think of being stuck in a tough situation, with challenges all around you. You'll appreciate the small breaks when things calm down. This isn't one of those times. I smiled. After Carol left my office, I called Molly to invite her to dinner with Mum and Len on Tuesday evening. She agreed right away. When I got home from work on Tuesday evening, Molly was waiting for me. I asked her how the meeting with the lawyer went. "It went okay. My part was quick and clear. She'll write to Peter telling him to stop making threats and respond to the divorce petition, or we'll take it to court. She'll also file the financial claim. I told her to make it the highest reasonable amount. Was that okay?" I smiled. "Of course, he owes you." Then it was mostly about Ralph and Susan. After Ralph shared his story, the lawyer asked if we wanted to make a legal claim against Susan, but I said no. "You don't want that, right?" Again, I said no. After that, I took a quick shower and changed clothes. Once I was ready, we headed to Les Jardins. As we drove, I said, "You know Mom will ask you how we're doing?" "Don't worry. I've faced your mother's questions before." "When?" "Before we got married. You think I could marry you without going through a test first? I talked about it with Margot once. We realized it was the same questions, in the same order for both of us, and we were supposed to be having a girls' shopping day." I laughed. Dinner turned out to be much easier than I had expected. Mum shared many stories about Brian and his family, which seemed to show what family life could be like. Len often talked about their trip to Scotland. At one point, I noticed Mum asking about how Molly and I were doing. I was speaking with Len about why he and his first wife moved to Australia when I saw Mum gently pull Molly away from us. I perked up, but Mum was turned away so I couldn't hear her. However, I did hear Molly say no. I thought wearing a short skirt and being charming would bring us back together. But we've talked 4 times now, and it has been hard. It's not Chris's fault, but I'm learning a lot about myself and how I hurt him. Susan always said he'd be fine and that men don't worry much, but I was wrong. So please don't push him. He's handling this better than I expected. Mum must have said something encouraging, because Molly continued, "I've mostly talked about Peter for the last 2 weeks. Can you think of anything worse than focusing on another guy? Chris hasn't complained at all. He really cares about my feelings, even when it must hurt him." Again, Mum said something, and Molly replied, "Yes, but I'm just starting to see that." Then I heard Len say, "I'll keep talking. You just nod now and then and say yes or no, so it seems like we're chatting while you're listening." This made me smile, and I appreciated his support. When I listened again, Molly was saying, "If it doesn't work out, it won't be Chris's fault or mine. We just can't seem to fix things, but I know he'll try." I didn't have doubts before, but after these first 2 weeks, I realize I do. We were having coffee when Mum turned to Len and said, "I don't think we can help them anymore. Should we head home?" "Tomorrow if you want, as long as there's a seat on the plane," Len replied. Mum looked at me and said, "There's nothing more we can do, but you should call every week and chat when you can." So outside Les Jardins, we said our goodbyes. I promised to visit Australia for Christmas no matter what, and thanked Mum for coming all this way to help me find my happiness. It felt like the situation was out of our hands now, including mine and Molly's. On the way back, Molly mentioned that she started talking to Heather Washington. They had decided to meet for lunch twice a week in Heather's office, with Molly bringing the sandwiches. So far, the conversation has only gone as far as Molly sharing her story, and Heather asking her what parts of it bother her the most. "And what did you decide?" I asked. "Why I ended up marrying Peter. I still don't understand it, even though I was there, and I know it affects you too, maybe more than it affects me." "Do you have any idea what she plans to do or how she will help you?" "Well, the big questions are about what I was thinking at that time, how Susan influenced me, and why Peter seemed okay then." "Yes, I suppose so. Apparently she believes there are tests I can take, even now, that might show how I felt and reacted all those years ago. That is, if I can remember well enough to answer the questions. Heather is looking into it right now." "Oh, I guess we'll have to wait and see." "And she wants to meet you and talk to you sometime." "Oh, no, she doesn't. I told you, I don't want to talk about my childhood or how I feel about Peter." "I think I know the answer to that one, and it didn't help your feelings for him." "Do I hear a hint of regret? Like you wished it were different?" "Not at all. I've thought a lot about you in the last 4 years, but the idea of sharing you with someone else is really not appealing to me. It bothers me a lot that I was with the wrong person for 4 years. I can't imagine how that makes you feel." "Well, it doesn't change how I feel." As the conversation drifted into personal topics, I asked, "Just to be clear, are there any photos or videos of you or you and Peter? Anything that could show up online from him being upset?" "Goodness. No, I wouldn't even do anything like that. He never asked either." "Good. I was just curious. If you remember, I took some pictures of you with my first digital camera. You seemed to enjoy it." "I might have," she replied with a smile. "What happened to those pictures?" I suddenly asked, feeling worried. "I destroyed them. At least I hope I did. There was one copy on a CD in the drawer, and I got rid of that. Were there any other copies?" "No, just that one." After a moment, I asked, "So, Back to our earlier topic. What does Heather want from me? I told her that when she discusses how she thinks I ended up with Peter, she should share it with both of us. That's it. Oh, that's fine. I'd like to know that. Anything to help solve that little mystery. After that, we continued to meet every Tuesday and Thursday to talk. And those talks were helpful. We talked about many things. When she mentioned her life with Peter, I didn't like it, but I noticed she had a similar look when I mentioned Helene. If I'm honest, I often talked about Helene with fondness, with a hint of wanting to get back at her. I thought Molly knew that, but didn't mind. The real story was about the people in our lives. Ralph visited Susan on Wednesday after Molly and I had dinner with Mum and Len on Tuesday. Molly said he didn't get far. She believed what she had done was unfortunate but necessary to keep her family together, and she thought that was acceptable. To her, Ralph's trip to Madeira was a chance for him to calm down and see things more clearly. She wasn't going to travel to speak with a husband who didn't understand her, so he went on his trip alone. The following Friday afternoon, around 4 o'clock, I received a call from Molly. I was in a meeting at work, but I was also anxious because we had our American partners visiting, and we wanted them to agree to let us make some new products. Still, it was unusual for Molly to call me, so I stepped out to take her call. "Hello, Chris?" She sounded a bit frantic. "Yes, Molly, what's wrong?" "It's Susan. I picked the boys up from school, and when we got home, she was sitting in her car in the driveway." "Where are you now?" "I'm in a spot just up the road from the house. You know the one? And the boys are with you?" "Yes." "Okay, you have a key to my place. Take the boys there, give them something to eat, and stay there for a while. They can even sleep over if needed." "I'll get to you as soon as I can." I went over to Carol's desk. "Carol, I have a situation. Susan, Molly's mother, has shown up, and Molly is going to stay in my flat with Jamie and Ben. I need to leave as soon as I can." I heard Carol mumble, "Things happen," under her breath, but she looked up with a comforting smile. "What do you need me to do?" "It's not an emergency. Molly can take the boys for a snack and they're all safe. But I should get there as soon as I can." "She shouldn't be afraid of her own mother." "I don't think she is scared of her mother. I think she's worried about their conversation. But you're right. Molly needs to tell Susan exactly how she feels. It will help them both in the long run." I thought for a moment. Okay, this meeting can go on without me. I'll just move them to the boardroom if it's available. Carol nodded. "Can you go downstairs and find Bill Ellswood? The Americans are with him, but I need to speak with them before they leave for their flight back to the States tomorrow. Tell him to find a good time to bring them up to my office, and I'll take care of what I need to do. Then he can stay with them until they head back to their hotel. I thought about inviting them to dinner. If Bill or John Wheeler can organize that, great, but I'm not doing it myself." "Sure. Is there anything I can do for you and Molly? Maybe confront that woman?" I smiled. "I don't think that would help. I just want to have my say. As a mother, it drives me crazy to think about what she did. I understand, but Molly is the best person to talk to her, and it's my job to make sure she gets that chance." I went back into my office, apologized, and moved the meeting to the boardroom without me. Then I sat and waited for the Americans. The meeting went really well. Carol did a fantastic job. She somehow found a great Dundee cake for our tea. I think the Americans believed I always took a break for tea and cake in the afternoon. After about 45 minutes, she came in to say that both John Wheeler and Bill Ellswood would love to take them all to dinner, and she already booked the restaurant and arranged transportation. That allowed me to end their meeting with me, and I could send them down. I got home just after 5:30, and Molly and the boys had just arrived and were watching TV. Molly looked very worried. Apparently, Susan had left 8 unanswered messages on Molly's phone in the last hour. Eventually, I managed to convince her that the only real solution was for her to talk to Susan directly. Molly had Susan's cell phone number, so I called it. Susan answered, sounding suspicious. "Hello?" "Hi, Susan, it's Chris." You could hear the anger and disappointment in her voice. "What do you want?" "I hear you're trying to get in touch with Molly." "Yes. She's my daughter, and I want to see my 2 boys." "They are not just your boys. They are Molly's and mine. I don't want them seeing you." They're my grandsons and I have a right to see them. No, you don't. I have joint custody, and I strongly object to them being around someone like you. If it comes to it, I'll fight to make sure you never see them again. You can't say that. Just wait until I tell Molly. She'll see you for who you really are. Well, you won't have to tell her because she's right here next to me. That surprised her, and there was a pause before she spoke. Okay, put her on the phone. Or are you keeping me from talking to my own daughter? No, I'm not doing that. I called to arrange for you to meet her. I assume you want to see her? That's why I'm here. Put her on. No. Do you have a pencil and paper? I'll give you an address where you can meet, I said. There was a short pause before she replied, yes. I then gave her my address and told her to come at 7 o'clock. I didn't give her a choice and just hung up. I turned to Molly and smiled. I don't think she likes me very much. Molly smiled back, but she looked a bit worried. Should we stop her from seeing the boys? I just said that to show her we are serious. She needs to understand that you and the boys are not just waiting for her. But it's your choice. If you think you can work things out with her, then we may have to see her sometimes. She'll enjoy watching me let her see the boys. She's your mother, so you decide, and I'll support you. We figured out that to be at my place by 7, Susan would have to leave her house around 6:30. So at that time, I put the boys in the car and drove over to Susan and Ralph's house, leaving Molly to face her mother. I had just finished putting the boys to bed and cleaning up the bathroom when there was a knock at the front door. For a second, I was confused until I remembered I had her key. Molly looked better than I expected, and she came into my arms for a comforting hug. How did it go? I asked. It was horrible. I helped myself to some of your brandy afterwards, but it turned out to be whiskey. I don't like whiskey, but it wasn't too bad. I smiled to myself, knowing it was good quality. It's 21-year-old Balvenie. Do you need another drink, whatever Ralph keeps? No, a coffee would be fine. We headed to the kitchen where she started making coffee. I asked, did she seem worried at all about Ralph wanting a divorce? Molly shook her head. Not at all. She thinks he's just a bit upset, but he'll get over it. I think she will be in for a big surprise, assuming he comes back from Madeira in the same mood he left. That's true, I said. Once the coffee was ready, we sat at the kitchen table. What did she want, if not to talk about Ralph? I asked. Molly took a deep breath. I think she came to speak for Peter. She tried all the same things she used 4 years ago. She said he was such a loving and nice man, and that I wasn't being fair for not giving him another chance. She even said it was cruel to have a solicitor reply to his request for us to get back together. She looked at me and shrugged. I hope that didn't change your mind, I asked. No, I told her I didn't love him, and it's best for both of us to get a quick and easy divorce. But she wouldn't accept that, I asked. Not really. When her pleas for him didn't work, she turned it all on you. She said you had never taken me back and never would. You left me and divorced me 4 years ago, and she wasn't sure if you've changed your mind since then. When I explained that you didn't get a real chance because of her lies and how she stopped me from seeing you, she didn't seem sorry at all. She said I would understand once the boys were older. Then she blamed you for everything. She said not only didn't you forgive me, but when she raised the stakes, you just walked away. She claimed you were a fair-weather husband. Her final reason was that if I had stayed with you, you would have taken me and the boys away to London, and even to Holland for 2 years. Wow, how terrible I am. I expect to find something unpleasant in my bed tomorrow. Oh, she wanted to know if you lived here with me. When I said no, she declared that if you ever tried it, she would rush to court to have you removed. That's just a petty response because I mentioned court if she came near the boys. Just ignore it. She smiled. At that moment, I lost it. I really went after her. I think it was her attack on you that upset me most. I told her how she tricked me into going with Peter. I accused her of trying to take advantage of me. I talked about her lies, her plan with Peter, everything. I told her she was selfish and a bad mother, but it seemed to have no effect on her. I ended by saying I wanted her gone and that I never wanted to see her again. I would keep the boys away from her. How did she react? I think I surprised her. She looked stunned, saying, "But I'm your mother." She shrugged again. "And how about you?" "I'm relieved, I think. But the sad part is that I meant every word. I hope she realizes that. I wish I never have to see her again, and I hope Ralph divorces her. It would be easier. Let's just hope she doesn't stick around to cause trouble, I said. Was she on her way back to Weymouth? Molly looked up. I didn't ask, but I suspect she'll go back to Peter. I really don't know. And I wonder what he will do now, that he can't use his usual trick. Suddenly, Molly looked at me, concern in her eyes. Then, just as quickly, she started to cry. I think the weight of the evening finally hit her. I moved around the table and hugged her. Hey, everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.